So good morning. It's Easter Sunday where we are, and we're going to have a conversation as we do every Sunday, but the last Sunday of every month. And Santiago, Loretta, and Mike MK are with us, and we're going to talk about the mental obsession and our seeming plight in this world that we're often struggling to reveal the essence of our existence, and often struggling with things that are, I would suggest, largely bound in thinking that is unfounded and relied on as though it is true, and it causes great havoc and great turmoil and great resistance and opposition to just about everything we see and everything we do, and can, anyhow. It doesn't always seem that way, but it seems to be a pretty prevalent human issue. But anyway, we're here this morning, Loretta, Santiago, MK, and I, and welcome to you three. Glad to be here. So you were just telling us, Santiago.
Me?
How you feel now?
I feel good. My tennis match today is a little later, so I can be here with you for a while, guys. And it's always good to see you, Jack, Loretta, Mike.
Thank you. Any issues anyone wants to start with or talk about or focus on, look at?
I would like to...
We can talk about mental obsession.
Anything in particular that seems to stand out that you notice?
Yes. I get very befuddled when I know better than to let my mind start spinning, But there are times, and I can be going very peacefully along and really and truthfully looking at life, from a spiritual perspective of putting others first, or self-care, or these type of positive things. But I never notice when the negative things start coming in my mind. They're like darts. And I don't really notice they're coming until all of a sudden I am into obsessive thinking.
Yes.
And it's very difficult to stop at times. Although I know how to redirect my mind, I know how to go to music and higher thinking, but yet it may be some one comment, that I'm taking wrong. And once again, then I'm back into self and looking at it as it is my problem and my words, which is not. But anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just, it irritates me that it happens.
Yeah. Well, it's an irritant. And my sense is that what you're describing, and then Santiago, I know that you wanted to say something. My sense is that we don't see our thoughts. We don't see our feelings. We don't see the past and the future. We just feel the effects of it. We don't see God, for instance, but we have a sense of presence when we're willing to be quiet for a minute, very often. If it's an unraveling of the thinking that's going on, that's giving us the impression that we're not in that grace, or we're not near that space or that environment, those are all just impressions created by thought, not reality and truth. They're superimposed on our experience, because the immediacy of our experience and the effect is happening as quickly as the thoughts are occurring. Just like our senses are sensing a lot of information all the time, but they don't, our senses don't have any opinion about it. They're just feeding us data. It's not, our senses aren't saying this is good and that's bad. They're just giving us sensations. We're deciding and thinking what's good and bad. We're deciding what we're doing with that thing. And that point you mentioned, Loretta, that they seem to be like darts coming at you and attacking you, is this idea that if we don't think we're doing it, we have nothing to do with it. And I would say that's been a major oversight in looking at the cause honestly and starting to see that we can be thinking things we don't even think we're thinking, and then wonder why the impact and effect of those things happens to us as though we have nothing to do with it.
Right.
And just shifting a little bit and saying, wow, if this is going on all the time, and it seems to me, I have this stuff when I notice circumstance around me, I'm constantly responding and reacting in ways, not constantly, but very often reacting in ways that are out of proportion to the circumstance, because issues that I have long since thought I had buried and resolved by ignoring them are constantly sort of gnawing at the edge of those experiences, asking for attention, literally just asking to be heard, like a child who's upset, just wants to be heard and held for a moment. But my inner dialogue doesn't tend to want to hold and help. It tends to want to be very abusive and create more resistance to that experience and more fight and got to get over it. And I'm irritated by it and I can't take this and I'm pissed off. And why does this keep happening? So I'm really trying to, in fact, I think in one way I'm trying to fix it, but in another resistant way, I'm actually maintaining it. And I'm fighting it. And I'm thinking that because it's happening and I don't think it should be happening, that it shouldn't be happening while it's happening. And that's a major conflict and experience.
Okay. When we ceased fighting everybody and everything, right?
Well, listen, these are all easy things to talk about. And yet there seems to be an area in us that isn't in language. It's not happening in the words that we use. The words that we use are designed by the thinking we do. But the knowing that we have isn't filled with words. It's just a sense of presence. Right. It's a sense of what's right and wrong. When wrong is wrong because it doesn't work. It doesn't apply. There's no applicable purpose that it has that becomes useless in our human experience. And it never will. But what's right will always work, which is why when you discover something right, we talk about these paradigm shifts happening. It's not as so much a paradigm shift. It's just people noticing when people do things right, if they do that same thing, they also get the right response, which is that it works. And that's a pretty quick and easy thing to get used to when you are interested in being productive or useful or whole in terms of your experience. And it's a very difficult thing to constantly think the wrong thing will someday be right if I keep applying it more and more and more and more. And that's really the rootedness of addiction in the mental sense. And my sense is the addiction is disease. It's in the mind. It isn't something, it's not in a place we can see. And it's not in a substance it's not in a chemical substance that we abuse. It's in the abusive substance in our own thinking that the lack of substance will someday have substance if I keep repeating it long enough. And people talk about, if you repeat a line long enough, it becomes true. For us to even consider that true shows how wonky our thinking is. Because if something isn't true, repeating it does not make it true, because it will never work and it never has any applicable purpose. There's no substance to it. There's nothing there.
So would you consider in your head that, like these darts or whatever it is, that let's just take someone saying a comment that just pisses you off. Would you consider that like wrong in your mind, because that would be a wrong response? I mean, could it be that?
It's the accurate response. The reactions compared to responses. Responses are responsibility, the ability to respond, meaning it's considered. You look at it and you see it in the totality of what's happening, not in the specificity of those words that hurt me and you can't say that and how dare you say that. Think of how reactive we are to someone's words. What are they? They are words spoken in midair that dissolve as quickly as they're said. But what do we do with them? Act as though our life is threatened. Because we think our thinking is real and true. We think our life depends on having everyone else think the way we do. That's the fight that we can't win, because there is no fight in peace, and there is no fight in love. There is no fight in principles. Principles don't argue with us when we don't obey them. We just get the consequence of failure that's difficult to bear. If we think we're doing the right thing and think it should be, we should get another result. And I would suggest every time we ever rely on a wrong thought, we always think it's right, or we wouldn't try it out. We wouldn't be testing it.
But how do you identify that? Because I'm something I was considering or contemplating when I was coming into today's meeting. Is like, you get to this place where you can't tell whether your thoughts are something you're just trying to ration with. It's something that you're like, oh, let me just consider this and that. But quickly you do start obsessing over it, but you can't tell whether it's just part of you thinking about it. Like, oh, I'm just planning. I'm just trying to figure out my best approach. And next thing you know, it's been a week and you're still stuck there. But like, how do you shorten that time to identify like, oh, I'm doing this again? Because I think our minds are so active. I mean, for me, I can think of a scenario that would come up at work and try to think about how to resolve it. And next thing you know, it's been done, but I'm a week in past it, still in that repetitive motion of in that repetitive motion of thought.
Well, and
like, how do you identify that?
You're identifying it. You're saying, my sense is that the obsession is only defending things that we think shouldn't be happening. So on the surface, the easy way to identify it is the idea that what's happening shouldn't be happening. So there's a clue. If I think what's happening shouldn't be happening, think of the conflict in that, and think of how laborious it would be to constantly be experiencing life from the viewpoint that what's happening shouldn't be happening, rather than concede that if it's happening, maybe it should be happening based on the circumstances I don't want to admit that I'm thinking about in some deeper level that seems to be out of touch, out of range, out of place, in some invisible form.
And I get there. It just takes me too long to get there at times.
Well, consider the length that you're getting there. If it takes a week, Michael, consider that you've spent your lifetime getting to the point where you're even beginning to concede that maybe something's going on that's a little broader than you're thinking. And what's interesting about this is that it's almost metaphoric for the whole concept of God and the whole concept of an infinite spirit and the whole concept of principles. You follow me? We're not even sure that we're doing what we're doing because of the invisibility of it. But as Loretta pointed out, the effects of it we're very aware of. So I can assure you that if we're aware of the effects, we are also aware of the cause. We don't have to admit that we're aware of it. But if we don't, we're making believe that the effect is the cause, and we're trying to fix the effect rather than say, wow, there's something going on here that I don't even think I'm doing that is causing this effect. To simply concede something in the simplest form of honesty begins to create a relationship to it that is not in conflict, which is why that thing I used to say, you're up to something. And what I'm up to is you're managing a thought that isn't true, making believe that if you keep trying it over and over and over again, you're going to get that thread of that. There may be some element of it that works, like you're talking about a business situation. There may be some threads of it that are workable. But in the midst of all the other havoc, the havoc is going to win out in terms of our obsessive experience, because we're not going to become conclusive enough to begin to notice those threads, because our attention will be drawn to everything that is, like you talked about, rationalization. It's another good example. If you're rationalizing anything, it isn't peace and it isn't true. You can just start noticing the whole interbulation is evidence that you're managing something that isn't true. And that alone, Loretta, when you're worried about these caustic remarks that you think other people are doing to you, they're doing to you that same metaphoric thing that we do in our own relationship to this thing we call ourself, by thinking the things that are happening shouldn't be happening and they shouldn't be saying what they're saying. So they're saying what they're saying is hurting me and they should stop saying it. We're trying to have them do exactly the same thing we're trying to do in our own head about not thinking these things. How do I stop thinking these things while I'm continuing to think these things?
Well, so hold on, because what I have found, or when you were just talking, or when Michael was talking, it made me realize most of the time, if I'm feeling that way, and I don't really think about them per se, I'll just sit there and think, well, what the F did they say that for? What does that mean? So it's usually an insecurity that it's touching in me of
Absolutely.
my own insecurity. So if I go inward, first of all, I have to go outward and let the words pass. And then inward.
To speak on what Jack says usually, Loretta, and I've identified, because Jack's put it in words for me, is that that's clearly something I'm struggling with to be able to identify it.
Yes.
To be able to see it and be like, oh, that's bothering me. Well, clearly I'm struggling with it a little bit more than I'd like to admit.
But the bothering is the alarm.
Let me point something out though, because it's easy to take this narrative and think of these things as deep. They're buried in us. Think of the way we talk about them. They're not buried in us for us to be experiencing them in the present. They're not buried at all. They're very obvious, and we are simply acting oblivious to continue the same cavalcade of arguments that we've used in the past, that someday, if I manage it longer, it will get true. It will become true. Someday I'm going to win this fight. Someday I'm going to get better. Someday I'm going to get over this, while we're maintaining it and committing to not getting over it, because we're not even dealing with it where it is now. The fact is, if we're aware of it, it isn't buried, it's superficial. Why? Because it's happening in the present right now. You know what else is happening right now in the present? An absolute loving spirit, an absolute, the nature of nature is in this present moment. So if we can create a situation that seems to inflict on us the opinion that that greater whole all of a sudden disappears and is not here, and we have to find it again, we have to search for it, simply because we're not willing to admit our own experience, it's a pretty big leap to blame an infinite source for coming and going, when in fact it's only the thoughts we're trying to get right that keep coming and as a result keep going. It's kind of like when people say to me, how's it going? And I say, it's going, but it ain't gone. It just seems to keep going, right? It's always in motion in some way. If we're alive in a human experience, we're always witnessing this ever-present state of interbulation. The relationship to it, if we think of it in narratives that keep it buried and hard, we're committing to thinking it isn't here. It can't be somewhere else if the present is where everything's happening. So starting to, as I've suggested, watch your words. It isn't a censorship of your words. It isn't not saying certain things. It's starting to notice that we actually develop narratives that give us the impression that the thing is somewhere else. The problem is somewhere else. If we think the problem is somewhere else, how are we going to deal with it? There is nowhere else. It's the thinking that's giving us that impression when the reality is always present. And my sense is that God is superficial. God isn't deep. Truth isn't deep. For truth to be deep means it's somewhere not here. That would mean it isn't true. It would violate the whole term of being truth or real. God isn't deep. God's superficial. Why? Accessible, in reach, always available, always available, always available. Why? Because it's infinite. It doesn't come and go. It isn't more or less. It isn't something I get and something I lose and something all those conditions are created by my thinking and then beginning to assign narratives to them of, Michael, why does it take 2 weeks? Well, I would suggest because it took 2 weeks would be one answer. Coming to terms with this stuff is starting to actually face what we have never faced. And if we're actually facing what we've never faced, we're looking into the face we thought was who we were because it was based on what we thought. And to look at that face and realize this whole thing has been imagined from the beginning, and ego has simply been an idea that my illusions about my thinking are who I am, means that my thinking thinks it's real and true because it does what it can to serve itself. Thinking of itself serves itself and serves a self of what? Thought, not reality and truth, just what it thinks.
Well, so if it is a situation like where someone is just totally misread you and it's rude, let's say, just flat rude, I would like to be able to be the type of person that could let that fly over my head and it not bother me.
Then begin to consider that circumstance is exactly what's going inside of you. And you are so tired of being rude to this thing you call yourself because you keep imagining that somehow it's true. Think of how rude that is, to make believe that what you think is all you are, when in fact all you are must be based on that same infinite source that isn't debatable and isn't optional and doesn't come and go and isn't more or less.
All right. But isn't there a point in time when you may need to go back and say, hey, I need to clarify this? What does that mean?
To them?
Yeah.
Well, start with yourself, and that time will be very intuitively available when you do, and you'll probably just say, I love you. And notice that they're too struggling, Loretta, with the exact same thing you do.
Okay.
It's so simple that Bill Wilson said in the Big Book that you wouldn't treat a sick friend the way that we tend to treat people that are annoying us.
All right.
And he's pointing to the fact that this mental problem carries with us, and if my lens of understanding is based on thinking that's wrong, I'm going to see great wrong in the world and great impossibility in the world, while it's the impossibility I'm creating by making believe it's not what I'm doing that I'm struggling with. And coming to terms with that is beginning to see that we're capable of creating obsessive thoughts anytime we want to maintain any thought that isn't true and make believe it's true. And beginning to embrace it and say, well, this is a possibility that doesn't go away any more than the possibility of picking a drink goes away. Book doesn't say never think about drinking again. Don't ever get near it. It doesn't say that at all. It says, if we have good purpose, you can be near it. You can be in the midst of it. And having been taken to a place of neutrality means I can think about it. I just simply don't have to act on it. The compulsion is gone because I'm no longer fighting the idea. I know that when I get those ideas, they're not based on reality and truth. They're not based on my ability to drink without consequence. And when I begin to see the consequence, the recovery is perspective to say, oh, if I do this, this is going to occur. When I do this in thinking, I lie and make believe it's true. And that's all that a lie is claiming to be the opposite of what it is. I'm going to have the same experience. To not want that experience and think that I should get rid of the experience while I'm maintaining the cause is a problem. That's addiction. I'm constantly trying to feel better about what I'm doing rather than notice that if I do the thing I'm doing, then maintain ideas that aren't true, I'm always going to have that sick reflected mirror, that broken mirror that I look into and try to see myself clearly when in fact it's a fractured mental state.
So the clarity may come with yourself.
Well, the clarity comes in realizing the thing you call yourself is just a thought thinking about itself. That's all that it is. Okay. Whenever we're thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about these characteristics that we believe are who we are, rather than just see their personalities. They're literally things we've created to give ourselves an identity, because who we think we are is what we think. If our identity is in fact a self that's united, that's part of everybody, nobody else has anything on us. Nobody else. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. How did we know that in kindergarten, but don't understand that as adults?
I don't know.
It's interesting, though.
It is.
We knew it then. We talked about it. All those little phrases kids say. I know you are, but what am I? Remember that? When somebody says you're an idiot and somebody says, I know you are, but what am I? You know, we're actually starting to grapple with this stuff very young, but most of the adults weren't mature enough to actually notice what was going on. So they basically helped us develop into the same way. We're inheriting culture and ideas that aren't true and making believe because they've been normalized for so long that they're normal. But normalizing abnormal thinking is not normal. Even to speak in those terms seems absurd. If I was insane as a kid thinking I was a fireman and then wondered why everybody kept burning in the buildings because I wasn't able to put them out, that wouldn't last very long before somebody'd say, hey, knock it off. You're not a fireman. You're 3 years old. You're wearing boots too big and a fireman's hat. That does not make you a fireman. But we do it with this other personality we call ourselves, and nobody tends to contest with it, except to the pettiness that we're all basically engaged in. And I would say all of us, to any degree that we're doing this, and then wonder why it seems so difficult. We haven't even looked at the fact that the source of it is what we each choose. Freedom of will gives us each the chance to make those choices at every point. And as soon as I make believe it's somebody else, somewhere else, something else, more or less of something else, somewhere else, someone else, I am actually claiming I do not exist. I do not want to participate. I have no willingness to actually experience my own experience. And I am now hell-bent against everything and everyone. And I think I'm going to win that crusade. It's impossible. And feeling that life is impossible is a pretty convenient way, or God is difficult to understand. Think of that. We don't even have to understand God for God to be.
So
whatever that concept is an infinite source of consciousness and awareness and knowledge. It's not a debatable, negotiable, rationalized, logical, reasonable effort. Those are all human endeavors. If the basis of my thinking is so sure that thinking's got to get me to God, then my God is thinking and reason. My God is ego. And if that isn't true, the whole basis of who I think I am is a lie. And that does not go over well with us.
So when you refer to, or I've heard my sponsor refer to this as we are all connected, is that speaking just really as being
Yes.
in the present time and seeing things through a perspective of love? Is that what that means?
Well, and it's seeing principles, for instance, Loretta, don't vary, right? And the whole point of the steps is getting to the point where we're practicing principles in all our affairs. What would that mean? It's either a test to torture us, to give us the impression that if we're not experiencing the freedom of principles, we need to get better, when in fact, the principles don't change. What helped me with principles was starting to say, oh, they don't change at all. The absolute doesn't change at all. Doesn't matter what I'm thinking about it, it still doesn't change. Now, the sole source of my conflict became my thinking. And rather than blame life and principles and how difficult it is and all these stories I would tell, I just realized, oh, it's what I'm thinking that's complicating it. So I didn't think that not thinking was the solution. What I realized was that maybe if I just started thinking about those things in more absolute terms, I would introduce that absolute nature to my thinking, and my thinking would naturally, as the book says, intuitively know what to do, rather than baffling me, because once more I'm launching off on a new thought parade, thinking that somehow if I get it going in a circle, it'll go forever, which is what mentally obsessive thinking is.
All right, so let's say spirituality, wisdom, courage, willingness. I'm not sure about all of them, but how do you I guess I'm doing the steps. I'm on step 4. So it's kind of like I know that 6 and 7 are coming.
So is 5, by the way.
Right, 5, 6, and 7.
Neatly inserted in there.
I think I'll do this one with you, Jack.
I think you have.
But no, I haven't. So my question is, it's like, I know we hear all the time living with these principles. How do you integrate that? I mean, do you to sit there and think, well, on a daily basis, am I willing? Do I have?
Again, if it's up to you, Loretta, you're never going to get it done.
Okay. I think
so whatever you think is never going to get there. If they're principles, the real concession is they're principles despite what you think. And they're principled despite how you act. And they're principled no matter what you feel. All of those things that you're thinking and feeling and doing is a thinking. Thinking is a doing, by the way. The action starts with the thought all the time. No voluntary action we ever take starts with anything other than a thought, always.
So what is the principle to that?
Well, you're talking about your fourth step. We're in the fourth month of the year, right? So one of the things we've been doing is aiming at the principles of the step of the month, just to give us a little bit of an anchor in relation to the steps. Morning, Anthony.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good.
So
Sorry I'm late.
if we are talking about the fourth step principle is courage. And why would that be courage? Because all of the immorality, the fourth step is about a moral inventory. It's about starting to look at my immorality, actually. Interestingly, that morality comes out of looking honestly at immorality when we thought that immorality was moral. Think of the conflict there again. Every one of the steps is giving us a chance to take what we used to think was true and see that it was not true at all, but it was us being self-centered in our thinking to serve the thinking we were doing as true, when in fact it was false, and creating great disruptions in us. So what's the opposite of courage?
Fear.
Well, I would say discourage. And fear, yes, would be a component of that. When we're discouraged, it's because we're doing things that we know won't work. They're failing over and over and over again. And we keep addictively thinking somehow if we get better, have more confidence, more ambition, more willingness. Listen, if we were able to have the willingness to drink or drug for years after we knew that it wasn't working, and I would say when you fail constantly, we know it. We just don't want to pay any attention to that. We don't want to pay any attention to the evidence. We want to pay attention to the fantasy, the delusion. It's very discouraging. Courage comes naturally because there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of where there is no fear. And as you pointed to fear, the only fear that's happening is maintaining ideas that aren't true. I know to be afraid, that self-centered fear is a condition I'm creating to give myself some evidence and perspective that what I'm doing is wrong. So what do I think? I got to get over this because I'm using addictive thinking. I'm coming from an addictive thought. What am I going to do? More addictive thinking. I need to get over it. I need to get by this. Why does it take 2 weeks to resolve this when it's taken 50 years to get to the point that I'm even looking at it for the first time, honestly? And then I want it to fix immediately, just like a drug might fix it or a drink might fix it. Gives me an immediate impression that I'm better, but it creates a long-term impression that what I need to do is keep avoiding what's actually happening, denying what's happening, pretending what's happening isn't happening, rather than saying, wow, if I actually sat with what's happening and to notice the discomfort, it would probably be comforting just to say, wow, this is actually happening. I'm being a witness to what is actually happening rather than what I'm making believe is happening and pretending it's happening and think should be happening and would be happening if it weren't for this, that, and the other. Rather than, you know what, if it's happening, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's something I haven't bothered to look at because I've been so busy trying to get where I can be, could be, might be, will one day be, wished I could be, rather than simply saying, the only place I've ever been is here. The only place I've ever been as a human is now. And those are human things, here and now, because they're based in space, which is where our bodies are, based in space and time. We function in that dynamic as humans. It doesn't mean that's who we are and all we are, as your sponsor pointed out. If we are united with something that is indivisible, immutable, meaning it does not go quiet. It's inviolable. It can't be violated. And if that's the case, and I spend any time considering that, which is basically the 11th step, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact, not to get a contact, but improve it. What does that mean? Better thinking in relation to what's actually going on. Thinking that's accurate rather than inaccurate. Beginning to align my thoughts and let that knowledge, that conscious awareness begin to actually express itself through my thinking rather than thinking I need to get my thoughts lined up to get there, as though it isn't here. Every time I think of it from thinking standpoint, you'll notice this, all of the justifications, if you watch your words, you're going to hear the stories you tell to justify it's not here. It's somewhere else, some other day, when they stop this, when that happens, when this happens, when anything happens that isn't happening happens, which, by the way, things that aren't happening will never be happening. And the awareness of, well, what's happening now is happening. Certainly, if my experience and my willingness is anything, I would be willing to have what's happening happen because it's happening. Not because it should be, supposed to be, must be. It's just happening. Whatever it is, it's happening right now. And as I get a little more willing in that regard, now I'm starting to use will in a productive way where I don't have to be willing at all because, again, I begin to realize everything's always been happening exactly as it's been happening. I've just been having a mental dialogue about it as though it's not happening and shouldn't be happening or wouldn't be happening if it weren't for this, that, or them. And I would be here. I would not be here where everything is happening. I would be somewhere else that would be better than here. How can somewhere else be better than here if everything that's happening is happening here? It makes no sense when it's looked at honestly. Now imagine the fractured states, mental states that come out of that, maintaining that thinking all the time, that disorder, anxious disorder, metabolic disorders, immune system disorder, all the bodily functions get undermined by this.
Let me ask you, is it possible that it is better somewhere else when you're saying, how could it be better somewhere else? Is that possible? Will you give me that at least, that somewhere else could be better?
Well, if you're thinking in fractured obsessive states, yes, in your own delusional thought, Anthony, there is some other place to be. But I will assure you, you have never been anywhere than where you are. There is no other place.
Yeah, but isn't it better to be in Hawaii when you're saying there is no better place to be?
But you're not there. You're not there, Anthony. You're again relying on your imagination to suggest that there's some other place to be now. What we're talking about is now. We're not talking about fantasy. We're talking about fantasy and illusion, but seeing that they're just ideas. They're just thoughts. Yes, you can want to be there. Yes.
You seem kind of defensive about that. You seem a little defensive. You seem a little defensive.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. That was what somebody said. I thought that was funny when somebody says that. You seem a little defensive about that. I got a question for you.
I'm not, Anthony. Let's not jump over this point real quick, because this is,
okay.
You're very good at maintaining these ideas that give you the impression that somewhere else, something else, some other time is going to give you.
I just think that's true. It's like I just didn't like that you said there's nowhere better to be. It's like, well,
I know,
yeah,
Anthony. You think things that aren't real and not happening are true. So that's a major conflict in reality.
Last night, guys, I was writing a letter of amends to a friend of mine that maybe 30 years ago I heard. And I was thinking when I was writing the letter, well, if I have not done those things, I will be in a better place. This guy will be in my life. But as Jack said, it's all fantasy, because maybe it's all fantasy. I agree with what you are saying, Jack. It's now, and last night this thought brought me into sadness, and I am so happy to be hearing what I am hearing now, because it's true. It's fantasy. I could say, well, if I haven't done this, I haven't done that, I will be better. But that is all fantasy.
Well, the beauty of it is too, Santiago, you are better because you are in fact here now, and everything that's ever happened is actually giving you experience enough to come to terms with what's actually happening and start to notice that forgiveness isn't about forgetting and condoning, for instance. It's not about going back and saying what happened didn't happen. What happened, happened. The fact is, though, we never think about it as it happened, because if what's happening is happening and everything that's happening is happening, to really think about something that happened would have to include everything else that happened. There's no way to do that, right? So it's always factually deficient in some way. But it doesn't mean we don't have memories. It doesn't mean, generally speaking, though, my experience is those people back there in those times are people we loved. We hurt over how we were behaving and thinking in relation to them because we really did care for them and we didn't know how to express it. And we lived for how many years? 30? You still there?
Yes,
Yeah.
over
So 30 years.
35, actually.
The sadness, 35 years, the sadness never went away. It was maintained, waiting for you to just look at it and say, wow, that hurt. The grieving we don't just grieve when people die, we're grieving the missed moments of their life. And if there's any tribute to death, it's beginning to realize that we are not very good at giving people who are still alive the kind of care and consideration that we seem to give people once they're dead. It's very interesting that we seem to need to have that experience to finally say, wow, I really love that person. And if you listen to what people say at funerals, they don't tend to talk about the worst traits of people. They start remembering the best things because they're not there to irritate them anymore. So their thinking is on another plane. Why do we not do that during life if this weren't for some sick, deviant, perverted way of thinking? And Anthony, I'm not suggesting you can't want to be in Hawaii. Hawaii's wonderful. It's incredible. The wind through the palm trees. All those experiences are great. The point of this discussion is noticing that if where you are is where you are right now, you pined to be in France for a long time. You thought being in France, and now you're talking about Hawaii. You're in France.
I was just using that. I was talking in general. Like, I didn't want to say France, but because people
I
can't
understand
relate.
I understand. My point is that if where you are is where you are, and you begin to concede that, all of those other fantasies and ideas don't condemn us. They're just thoughts we're having. And the freedom, MK, the freedom in that clarity of starting to actually witness where we are, like Santiago was talking, he felt the sadness. When we're willing to be where we are for a moment, we witness the things we've been running from and thought we could get away from, but they've been ever presently there while we have been acting desensitized and numb to them. Numbness is evidence of pain. And to hurt over things is to see things that hurt. There's nothing wrong with that. It aligns. Fantasy is one of our greatest attributes, creativity, the ability we have to actually think and innovate and imagine things that would be so spectacular that everybody would benefit from. And I would imagine in some way we all think in those terms because we're capable of that kind of doing, that kind of action, where you could invite everybody to Hawaii.
So, Jack, do you think, okay, so I totally get Santiago because it's like, that's how I feel about hurt. When hurt comes, it's just like it. I totally get that. And amends, I look forward to. For me, what I was thinking when Anthony said that, it's like, I've noticed though, with this excessive thinking, if you take yourself to the other side of your brain or push yourself up spiritually to your higher attributes, such as imagination, inspiration, intuition, and this type of thing. And for me, listening to a violin concerto or something like that will help my brain to relax. And it is going to another place, but the anxiety of the obsessive thinking creatively can be amazing. Like with painting, the anxiety comes out in brushstrokes and you do things faster or even on stage, I remember lines when I have anxiety.
I would distinguish the difference between obsession and inspiration is that one you are free to do and the other one you feel condemned to be the only thing you can do. And I would say, Loretta, that this mask is such a thin veil that it's given us the impression that illusion is reality, which is delusion, and that's our life. Who we think we are is who we are, and we've been fighting for this idea of self and ego as being who we are, when in fact, if it's no more than a thought, and I recognize that, I've just been thinking to my thinking. I haven't been thinking to myself, and I've been talking to my thinking. I've not been talking to myself. There's no self to talk to until I make believe that my thinking is reality and my thinking is true. And Anthony, that's the division. It isn't
I
to
agree
say.
with you on that. I agree with you on that. I mean, I don't think you understood what I was saying, actually. I agree with you on this. I was just being technical. I didn't need to be so technical. We agree.
Anthony, if you think your technicality is violating the premise of the present being all that there is, That is not a technicality. That is a justification. And my point
No, I'm
is,
just saying that you said you can't be somewhere better. I'm saying you could be somewhere better. That's possible. That's not going to fix everything, though. That's the part I was getting. Just because you are, yeah, you want to be somewhere better. You could be somewhere better, but that doesn't necessarily everything's going to be okay. I wish it was just that easy, you know? That's what I was saying. There's more to that. You just can't say, oh, you never could be anywhere better. You're right where you are. It's like, yeah, you can be somewhere better. You're still going to be you, and you're still going to have those same problems. That doesn't change.
well,
And also,
as long
real
as
quick,
you,
real
but
quick, I
Anthony,
just wanted to say sorry to
Anthony,
Santiago. I just wanted to apologize. Haven't seen him for a while. I apologize, Santiago, on recording that for what I said. So I'm sorry. It's still been bothering me.
No problem, Anthony. It's forgotten. Don't worry.
Yeah, I
about it.
love you, buddy. Good to see you.
Oh,
so
I felt
Anthony,
so bad. I felt terrible.
Anthony, the issue that we're talking about here is not that there can't be other things we can do to feel better. But as you just said, even going to those other places, your problems still remain.
Right.
Okay, so what I'm trying to impress on you, and if I'm speaking to your thinking that's obsessive, you're not going to hear what I'm saying. You're going to hear what you think I'm saying, and that's going to lead to another obsessive thought to try to justify the obsession that you're having. So I just want to create a little bit of a break here, if possible, and say that if the present is the only place we can ever be, and it's all we ever are in, ever, making that concession begins to eliminate a lot of the rationalization of all those other things. And all those other things now become great possibilities rather than the idea that I'm going to have what I'm unwilling to accept I have right here now. If I get there, I'll be better. And you just admitted you're going to get there with the same problems, because the thinking that gets you to those places, thinking you'll be better then, is the same thinking that you're not where you are now in all respects.
That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, listen, it's not lost on me that words can lose us in this.
yeah.
I understand that. And I
I
am,
don't think you understood what I was saying either, but that's okay. I don't want to go back to it because
so keep in mind, in our own constructed worlds that we think are ours, nobody's ever going to understand what you're up to, because it's insanity to make believe that we have separate worlds. Nobody's ever.
And here's the funny part. I always use that can thing. It's like, if we're even talking about it, obviously it's a possibility. And not only do I not understand you sometimes, but I don't understand myself even more. And that's what's frustrating.
Yes.
That's where I take it from.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here.
So we can continue to develop new ways to think insanely, and we can continue to think that the world and everybody needs to understand it from our perspective. But to think of that is to think that your perspective is real and true. And it once again reveals this idea that it's thinking is truth and reality that we struggle with. As soon as we cross that line, judgment isn't a problem in thinking, because thinking's always judging. The problem is that when you judge something and you think your thoughts are true, now you feel everyone is condemning you by not thinking your way and not understanding what you think and not understanding it the way you think. Exactly as we're talking about right now. I don't need to understand the complexity of the structure you've built to claim your own understanding, because understanding is a product of thinking, not knowing. Knowing doesn't understand. Knowing doesn't have anything to understand because it knows everything. It doesn't have anything to think about because it doesn't think. It doesn't have a self to fight for and defend. That's all a human condition.
You know, it's almost covered in the prayer of Saint Francis.
Yes.
The whole thing, you know, if you think about it.
Yes.
I've been memorizing and saying that prayer in a different manner, and it is those are powerful words.
Yeah, but think of what he's doing too. He's taking apart presumptions that aren't true and aiming us back in the direction of principles.
Right. Exactly.
He's talking about surrender. He's talking about forgiveness.
Yep. Sure.
Interesting, though, think of in the Lord's Prayer, it says, forgive us as we forgive others. Interesting.
Well, and in St. Francis, it's dying to yourself. That's pretty cool. Dying to yourself.
What's that?
dying to yourself,
Yes.
that you will find eternal life.
Right, because that self is only limited to what you think it is, and actually threatens the existence. Your human experience is threatened in all of its capacity to express a loving, absolute nature.
Exactly.
By making believe who we are is what we think. And that's ultimately self-centeredness. Bill Wilson didn't say, don't think about yourself. He didn't say that at all. He said that when self-centeredness runs wild or runs riot, we got a problem. He's talking about the kind of self-centeredness that we think is true, we think is real, we think is all there is. And we think as a result, everything else should obey and fall in line with us. We're trying to be God. And he says the God thing didn't work. Trying to be God didn't work. He said we surrender our finite selves to an infinite source. Not in those words, but that was the... Now, the fact is, he's really talking to people who are self-centered to think that we need to surrender to have that infinite source. We don't need to surrender to have that infinite source. But if we don't, our human experience is going to be muddled and seemingly imperiled with fraught and lack and struggle and anxiety and stress and conflict and depression. All of those things are natural consequences of making believe that we are the sum total of only what we think. And that would be like thinking I'm an arm because I'm thinking about my arm. That would seem ridiculous. And yet we do it when we think about our thinking and think it's who we are. And now we need to defend a self that doesn't even exist except in our own thinking. It's no different than a lie. A lie does not exist in the world. Lies exist in thought. That's it. Lies don't exist in a knowing nature that's absolute. There is no lie in that because it's truth and reality. It's an absolute consciousness that doesn't think. It doesn't have bits and pieces. There are no parts.
There is no I in lie. I mean, there is an I in lie.
But
Well, you keep rowing that boat, Anthony. And see if it's easier upstream or downstream. I mean, think of even that. Row your boat gently down the stream. Gently. Why? Because you're running with the current. What's the current now? What's the current? The movement, the ever-present nature of this moving capacity we have to express. Gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. We're thinking about it in terms that are real when in fact it's just a dream. It's trying to take off the shackles of this idea that we're condemned to anything other than the ideas we create that we think are true and real, and imagine that all of a sudden everyone else is condemning us because they don't think the way we do.
I tell you what, Anthony, I'll sit in the back of that boat. You'll get a lot of help from me.
Right.
You should
As
see
long
her
as you can be
outboard.
in the boat, as long as there's a bathtub on that boat.
No, she's got an outboard motor like nobody's business.
Like,
Hey, so Jack, when is the question part time?
Q&A. Let's do a Q&A.
Yeah, right.
Apparently,
Where's the Q&A?
you just started it.
I just had so many questions, but yeah. Does anybody want to go first? I don't want to be a hog.
Sure you do.
I know. Didn't sound right. Oh, what I was going to say, just real quick, I knew I was going to say something. One of the reasons, because I keep trying to figure out why, when you're so honest about yourself and you tell the truth, does it feel so good? Then I realized it's not like you walk up to a bunch of people that you don't know, or sometimes you do, but it's because you're usually hanging around with other people that are doing the same thing. So it's a good environment, and then you tell the truth, and then there's a mutual thing to it. It's not just like you tell the truth and all of a sudden you're like, wow, why is everybody loving it so much? A lot of the time because you don't associate with people that are telling the truth usually, right? So it feels good when you have a friend and they tell the truth and then you tell the truth.
Yeah, it's like a drug.
I'll answer you. I'll piggyback off of that, Anthony, because it's something that I was missing. So when I became sober in 2019, and then obviously, months later, everybody went into lockdown. So I spent most of my beginning of my sober years home. And yeah, you already know where this is going. And so I was able to reflect on a lot of things. I was able to do a lot of work, and obviously with my wife, and there was a lot of growth that happened in those years. And I came across this group as well, and that's why I appreciate it so much. But recently I've gone back to work in an office space, smaller office space, not a ton of people in there. Oh boy. It's you hear and you see the camaraderie that exists in complaining, that exists in making sure that everyone is validating the things I'm saying, and I'm going to say the same things that they want to say.
Yeah.
And it's very apparent now and obvious now, my need before to belong or to say things that others agreed with, or at least having to not say things in fear that they wouldn't agree.
I agree with you.
So I'm sitting there and I deal with that. We had a smaller group come into the office, or part of a different team. And man, just listening to them, it put on display what you're mentioning. They just every day would make sure that they validated each other's complaints and arguments and things that they weren't happy with. And you just see where why would you say anything outside of that? So I found myself, I just didn't associate. I just didn't talk to them because I identified that I can easily dive right in with them and go there and complain. And
not only could you talk about other people bad or other things, but you could talk to yourself a lot worse.
Oh, easy. Oh yeah, I'm the worst. Oh,
right.
It's all of it. But it helped me identify how far I've come and how much work, and gets me emotional, how much work I've done to get out of that mindset. Because it's not easy to do that when you're surrounded by people who aren't they're not aware of it. And there's nothing wrong with them for that. They just don't spend the time. They're not interested in that. And I've just found that I can't associate with them in that way. I can say hi and I can be cordial to them. I'll be nice to them, but I have to be very careful when the conversations go in a direction that just aren't beneficial to me, that I am aware enough to step away and just say, okay,
that applies to marriage. That applies to marriage. Yeah.
Everything. It applies to everything. If it's I want to be adding value and be liked and make sure that everybody gets along. I'm the middle child. I want everybody to get along. And I quickly realized as I've gone back into working with other people that just live completely different lives and learn things that I do, that's not possible every single time. But I have to know that for myself, and I have to leave them be and step away.
And, Michael, it's like, sadly, I have found that, you're going to find most people are in that type of dynamic, or I should say, I don't know the right word to say, but what's odd is that you're not going to find very many people who are where you are.
I know. Trust me.
That's what's so sad, because it's like, you have a limited range of friends. I mean, I think I know one person that I can talk to, higher vibrations, I should say, because you're talking about very low vibrations. What you put out in the world, comes back. And I'm not necessarily saying it comes back, but if you're going to put that out, it's very low.
You share it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Let's go to 9th grade today. Say we're at the end of junior high.
We can go to the 8th grade hall, Jack.
Okay, let's go to 8th grade. I want to mention something. These impressions we have of other people are filtered and lensed by the lens we see them through is exactly the relationship we have with the thing we call our own self. Exactly. And so the struggle we're having with it and the demoralization that we have in them is thinking that behavior isn't something we're doing. So it's something as a result, just like we were talking earlier, Loretta, that word that woman says or that person says, that sentence that they say has such an impact on us because it disrupts the whole sense we have of order within the construct of who we think we are, within the reason that we've used to justify it. They're actually giving us perspective that we don't seem to have in our own inner conversation. And then we discount it by thinking that their behavior isn't something we're doing. It's happening to us the same way we think the effects we're witnessing are happening to us and not being caused by us. So to the unity point, Loretta, if everybody is the same, and the bridge here, I was going, hi, John. Welcome. The bridge here is not, and Anthony, this goes back to your point. When you're hanging out with people that all think like you, you're basically intoxicated with the idea that you finally found an environment that doesn't conflict with your thinking, so you're safe. When in fact, if your thinking is sick, you're in a drowning pool of people that are going to sink you as quickly as they can because you're making believe you're better because they don't conflict with your thought. Rather than actually, if it's honest, starting to see that their nature is identical to your nature. And this is the beginning of starting to actually loop around and see that if things aren't divisible, and we start seeing that what other people seem to cause in us is exactly what we're causing ourselves, as you pointed out, Anthony. If I'm doing it, we're talking about it, I'm doing it more to myself. The immediacy of that experience is so difficult to live with that I want to make believe it's somebody else doing it so that I can finally have the perspective to start to claim what I'm doing again and seeing that it's not those people that I hate and it's not them that are low, it's their thinking and their behavior and their policies that I'm struggling with.
Well, and I don't have the dubious luxury of being around gossip and drama.
Sure you do. You're around it as much as you promote it in your own thinking and you make believe it has nothing to do with you.
Because I'm not around it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Loretta, you're creating
the gossip and dramas in your head.
Gossip is every thought we have that isn't true that we spread like a rumor and come up with justifications to blame other people.
I understand that. But what I am trying to say is referring to Michael, in an office situation, if I am going to embark upon people who are gossiping, I do not have the dubious luxury of going in and saying, oh, you know what? Y'all are so right. I walk past because I don't want that in my head. That's what I'm trying to say. Well, and if it's not in my head, I'm not doing it.
Well,
but if you're thinking you have to stay away from them, it's in your head and you're doing it to think you need to stay away from them.
I come back to Jack's point. It helped. My end of this narrative story would be that it's helped me identify the things I'm still struggling with.
Right.
Because if I'm so eager to be like, ooh, I can, that's a juicy one to jump on. I'm like, oh, okay, clearly I still have some things that I'm not as done with, like Jack always says when we leave these meetings, like try to actually practice it. Like, okay, cool. I can sit here and have these wonderful thoughts and ideas and have everything under control. And then I walk outside and I'm seeing all these triggers, if you will. Clearly there's some things that I'm having to do a little bit more work with than I thought. I'm not cured, if you will. But yeah, I know what you mean, Loretta, but yeah, walking away from it and just acting as though it doesn't exist. That, well, clearly, if I'm identifying it is what it is, that might be a better part of the process for me.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist, okay? I'm saying I'm making a choice, if possible, not to be involved. I have to stay sober right now. So for my sobriety, I should put that in there. When people are gossiping, that is not a principle. Gossiping is not a principle. That's not in St. Anthony's prayer, okay? And we do forgive. I know what they're saying. I know where they're coming from because I used to do it too. But my head is much better in a place with talking with someone like you who is moving forward. Does that make sense?
I understood.
Okay.
Yeah, and I use this point that you're making as well in a different case. Like when I sit down and talk to someone and explain that I am sober, all of a sudden they got all these hopes and dreams and things that they want to stop drinking. And my joke is always, we leave and the week later, my wife is like, oh, I wonder whatever happened. I said, look, it's real easy to be sober when you're with a sober person. But I'd be more curious what happens
when we're stuck in groups and all the little fish hooks of their barbs are sticking in our clothes, it doesn't seem like there's much perspective in that, because we're really focusing on the itsy bitsy pieces rather than the overall whole.
Exactly.
Every organization has a goal. The goal of Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, is to help the still suffering alcoholic. That's it, primary purpose. So anything shy of that is violating that purpose. And we know that if what we're doing isn't reaching that goal, which is to give ourselves in some way that's beneficial, because we're uniquely qualified to talk about this, having been through the experience directly and are still in the experience directly, then we know anything shy of that isn't the goal. It's easy to start to actually be in an organization that works that way. Most organizations don't work that way. They actually support the defective nature of the thinking of the people involved and somehow survive despite that, which is kind of remarkable. But they tend to be manipulative and cunning and all the things that would be cunning and baffling to us in our own experience, because they just become emblematic of the individual on a global basis or on an organizational basis. So it's not unusual.
I can see the point. I'm able now to be in a group that's gossiping, but I just go up to my higher self, and think spiritually rather than to join in, because I'm not going to join in gossiping.
But consider you're already joined. This idea that we're separate and distinct is exactly the idea that our thinking is true and real, and we don't want anything to do with anyone that doesn't have to do.
It's not separate and distinct. It is being in a group and not going down to that level, Jack. If you do that and get involved,
you're capable of it, Loretta. Sometimes you do that. And if you begin,
no. I choose not to do that anymore.
I got it. Okay. I got it. It's an easy choice to make believe you make.
It doesn't work. It's wrong.
I know it doesn't work. And by maintaining the idea that you need to fight it or somehow or another choose opposite, you're creating the fight. That's what I'm suggesting.
But I don't have to fight it. There's no reason to fight it.
Okay. See if it comes up again. See if it happens unexpectedly. And it will be an indication of you making believe.
Yeah, it's unexpected.
You started on this course today by being so surprised that these things are still happening around you.
Okay, that was one comment, and it was in the text. If it's unexpected in a group of people, I just excuse myself and go in the bathroom and get myself together. Because going down and berating another person, this is what I'm saying, gossiping, berating another person is not a principle. I want to live in the principles, and that doesn't exist, does it? Berating another person, is there a principle for that? Well,
it's interesting that you think that engaging in that conversation means immediately having to berate somebody. That isn't a requirement. That's just a presumption that if they're doing it, you have to do it, or you're not part of them, rather than say, folks, perhaps there's a bigger goal we all share in common that we could focus on.
I do that.
Okay, I'm not arguing what you do or don't do. I'm just suggesting that if you think berating is the condition of it, you're thinking of it as something you need to do in that respect. It isn't a requirement that we ever do anything unprincipled. It is a choice always that we do things unprincipled.
That's why I go in the bathroom and regroup.
Okay. And as you become more familiar, you'll notice that there's a discomfort immediately. There's a sense of displacement immediately. There's a sense of fight immediately. There's a sense of anxiety immediately, not because of what's happening around me, but because of what I'm thinking about it in relation to the person I think I am.
And that's an alarm.
What's that?
I consider that an alarm.
Yes, good.
Okay?
That would be a good description. It's like a signal, like a stop sign. You don't have to stop.
It's still my insecurities I'm working on.
Yes.
Because those alarms are telling me that I'm the one that's feeling this, and I'm the one that needs to go up into my self.
Keep in mind, Loretta, if they all have the absolute essence, there's no up to go, there's no down to go. It's just an absolute state of being that they already have, and what they're struggling with, like you and I, is what they're thinking. That's all. And when you see it that way, to Anthony's point earlier, when you start to this, everyone asks, how do you stop obsessive thinking? The only way to do it is to start being honest about what's actually happening.
Right.
In as much as letting it happen and see it as something happening and saying, wow, I'm playing a part in this. I don't even think I'm playing a lot of times. I'm caught off guard because I'm usually so on guard. I think that my job is to be defensive rather than say, wow, I am really sensitive to this stuff. And it does impact me. Like Santiago was talking about, he felt sad. All those moments that added up never changed what he was feeling. It was his opinion that was changing the whole time until he looked at it and started addressing it and confronting it. Did he feel the actual sadness? I would say that's a tribute to the friend he has, to the person he's talking to, because he's borne a weight for what he did to a degree that it's come clear enough to begin to want to actually tell that person, I love you and I appreciate you. And I've thought about this for a long time, and I'm sorry for it. Not because I'm sorry apologetically thinking somehow that's going to earn, but because I've been sorrowful for years, maintaining the idea somehow in my seeming subconscious that's been gnawing at my experience. And I'm finally being willing to start openly discussing it and talking about it. And I don't, Santiago, I'm speaking words for you, but I don't, I'm sure there's more to it than that. But the basic trend is, I think, obvious.
That is beautiful, Santiago.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
You know, remember last week, Jana was talking about the conflict she had with her friend?
Yeah.
And she wanted to make the amends, and she was really just had to get it over, wanted to fix it and all that. And she sat on it for the week. And the woman sent her a text and said, I love you, I miss you, and thank you. She didn't say a word, but the lack of trying to fix it gave a little bit of room for the essence of what actually existed. We don't get angry with people because we don't care about them. We get angry because we're pretending not to care about them, because we're caring about things we think are true and real when we're completely discounting their reality and truth is the same as ours. We're making believe they're separate from us. We're not separated from anything in an infinite source. Nothing ever. That's the principle. And the principle of evil is that it never works and it doesn't exist, and it's only a delusion to maintain only in thought. It's only maintained in thought. It isn't something that's real. It's non-existent except to the thinking we do about it. And that's where the conflict and the grief and the mourning and the present traumatic stress occurs. It's right where we are, as we are, thinking what we do in relation to what everything else that's going on. And to become thankful for everything when we actually allow it to give us the perspective we're not willing to have on our own immediate experience, because this thing I call me is happening in my brain with my thoughts and my feelings and my anguish and my pleasure. It's all happening in the same place. There's not a lot of perspective in that. My perspective comes from seeing it in others and beginning to see them honestly, Anthony, starting to say, wow, when these people are doing those things I feel comfortable with, It doesn't mean that they're actually helping me. They may be helping me get better the same way I drank and used to feel better about what was wrong, the same way I run into wanting more, having more, getting more, being somewhere else, always somewhere else, never here, always about then and there, never now. We are not well practiced at noticing we've always been in the present. We're always essential. We're always essence. And essence is essential. It isn't an option. It's an absolute state of being that we have, that we wouldn't have such clarity about what's wrong if we didn't have that greater sense of knowing. We know what's wrong when it's wrong. We feel it. We sense it.
So then how do we become more spiritual?
You don't. You can't. There is no more or less of something that's infinite. It's a complete
my friend, when I asked him, he goes, it's an inside job. You can't become, it's an inside job.
But we think of it inside because we have one thing that we're each allowed to do that we choose, which is choice. Each of us makes a decision at every moment whether we're going to go with what's happening or make believe what isn't happening is happening. We're constantly in that dilemma. Am I overwhelmed with what's happening? Because if I'm overwhelmed, it clearly indicates that I have some limited perspective of what should be happening. What's overwhelmed is my thinking, nothing more than that. And if that's the case, and I start realizing, oh, I'm overwhelmed because I'm maintaining thoughts that are limited, I begin to embrace this overwhelming experience and realize I can be much more aware of things than I would be willing to.
Embrace the overwhelming, Jack. Embrace the overwhelming. I like that.
Well, it's being open effectively, and that's what willingness ultimately is.
Yeah.
Honesty, openness, and willingness are sort of the trinity of mental health, just like responsibility, choice, and freedom. If we're denying our own experience of what's happening right now, we're creating a whole narrative that isn't true. We're creating a fiction that is never going to be an autobiography. And to fight for a life that doesn't exist in the name of thinking it's all that exists is insanity. It isn't healthy, and it never will be, and it doesn't matter how far we go and how hard we think.
All right, so I want to say something about spirituality. And I'm not trying to argue with anyone, but for me, spirituality does grow. And spirituality is an awareness, of what is going on in the present. You can react to it from ego or from your spirit. And for your spirit, what I have found that gets me into my spirit so I don't react is to start out the day and look at others as God would have me look at them, which is with love, kindness, and tolerance.
Well, as they are.
Exactly. So if you walk into a room or if you're in a situation, if you rise above your ego, go to your spiritual self, you're looking at it with love, kindness, and tolerance, and you do find yourself there.
But you're still using your thinking to think that it's bigger or smaller.
No, I'm not using my thinking. I'm going up into my spirit.
It's as though it's away, though, Loretta. You're saying that it's somewhere else.
It's not away. It's inside me, Jack.
Is it?
Of course it is. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't.
Well, then how's it inside me? How's it inside us? Just go with me, Loretta. Go with me. Go with me before you reinforce the thinking you're doing.
Okay, here I go.
If it happens,
choose to use it, Jack, it's a choice to go to. And if then your choice is greater than God, is what you're saying. No, God is love. Okay. I can grab as much love as I want because He's infinite.
Yes.
He's okay. I can.
So then you can't grab any of it because it already has you.
No. Yes, it does have me. But if I talk to Him, if I am aware of Him, I get more.
I understand the thinking in relation to it, Loretta. That's largely what this conversation is about. I'm simply pointing out that it's thinking that gives us the impression that we're higher or lower, more or less.
Belief and faith. It's not thinking. It's belief.
Belief is thinking. God doesn't believe in God. God doesn't believe in us. There's no lack of belief in an absolute knowing nature.
It's believing in a higher power. That's in the steps, okay? Believing.
It's a thinking thing you're describing. And I'm simply suggesting, and I know this meets great resistance, because it actually strips thinking of having anything to do with an absolute knowing. Thinking is a product of an absolute knowing power.
I'm talking about knowing. I'm not talking about thinking.
Okay. Then in knowing, in absolute terms, there is no more or less because it's everything, and it's more than everything.
Take those words out, okay? Let's take those words out. But
let's use the word, since that's what we're here to do, is talk about it.
Let's talk about awareness then. Let's use that word.
Okay.
So awareness with a higher power. How aware do you want to be? You can be a little aware and gossip and stay in that place, or you can be aware like Michael and rise up, or whatever you want to call it.
Those are all thinking things, though, Loretta. And the idea that we can block God is just a thought. It isn't true.
Having an awareness is not thinking. It is knowing.
Okay, good. I'm with you there. So if we know, it isn't about thinking at all, because it just knows we know. Right. And we know. That's what the ultimate awareness is.
Right.
Okay. So I'm just pointing out When we use words like thinking, we go higher and we go lower, and all, we're creating an image that thinking is the controlling. All that's happening is we're controlling our experience with the thinking. We're not controlling God and this infinite source.
Then I'm using the wrong words.
No, don't worry. There's no words that can ever add up to actually saying this.
But I'm not worried.
What's that?
I'm not worried. What I'm trying to say is maybe I am still looking for the right verbiage to describe what I'm talking about.
Well, then consider, given that we're coming here to consider things and talk about things, and the basic premise of the mental obsession is making believe that thinking is reality and truth, consider that knowingness, you can't have more or less of something in an infinite source. You use the word infinite. Let's talk about infinite as being infinite. Something that is infinite doesn't come and go. It doesn't exist in a relative form. It's just an ever-present state. If it's in you, it's in everything, and it's in everything in between everything, because it happens to be where everything is. It means it's not a spatially bound element. And the present, I would suggest, is in fact that place. That knowing nature is in fact exactly where we are right now. It is what an infinite source gave us infinitely, not from the beginning, because there was no beginning to something infinite, and there's no end to something infinite. It's starting to see that it's always here, it's always now, and the only thing that gives us any other impression is what we think. And if the thinking is speaking in thinking terms only rather than absolute terms, you will see that you develop a narrative that there are things you need to do. And I appreciate that you're in step 4, and that these steps are really designed to get you to step 12, where you're practicing principles in all your affairs. So there's obviously issues. There's issues for all of us in the steps that are still untapped in terms of our own thinking, because principles, just like the absolute, do not change. Honesty doesn't become dishonest because I lie. Honesty remains honest. Truth remains true. Knowing remains knowing, regardless of what I think about it. In all respects, that's a transition that if you just consider, it will eliminate a lot of the thinking you do that you think the words are necessary to put together, because you'll start saying and realizing, yeah, I've always known that I knew. I've always been aware. I've only been pretending I wasn't to justify the insanity of my own thinking.
Oh, okay. The question was from Anthony was, how do you, I don't remember.
How do you become more spiritual? And I said, you can't.
And I just disagree with you.
I understand.
And that's it.
I'm very clear about that. I've dealt with hundreds of people on this issue, and I hear it a lot.
Well,
but I guarantee you, Loretta, in an infinite space, do you think the universe right now is crippled by your thinking?
No.
Let's just use something small like the universe.
No, I don't. I don't think thinking has anything to do with the universe other than
beautiful. Then it doesn't have anything to do with the spiritual nature growing or getting smaller.
We have our ego, Jack. You see, and our ego
only to the degree that you make believe your thinking is who you are.
So that's the same with spirituality. So our ego,
it is not.
Let our
it is not. It is not. Spirituality is not a delusion if it exists.
Push the darkness to the side, get rid of it.
Spirituality is not a delusion if it exists. Ego is a delusion and only exists like a lie based on thinking it's true.
Totally
Truth and reality do not need thought to be true and real.
Totally get that. Neither does spirituality. Okay?
I would say it's the only thing any of us ever struggle with, Loretta, and I still struggle with it, and I'm glad to hear that you're beyond it.
But there's no struggle with it.
Okay. So then there's no argument.
No, there is no argument.
That's funny because Jack says there's no struggle a lot. That is your words, Jack. There's no struggle.
Yeah.
Well,
not in reality. There's struggle in mental incapacities and mental debilities and mental.
There is no, if you say there is no struggle, that is your spirituality speaking.
Yes.
Do you think?
But the struggle only appears in the delusional thinking we do. It doesn't really exist except in delusion.
But you're recognizing it, so it is your spiritual self.
Well, I would say it's ours, not mine, not yours.
And let me tell you, we'll have to talk later about this, but by the time I get finished with you, pretty well, never mind. Spirituality is something to share. I think that's the biggest thing to share.
We already share it right now. It's the nature of our existence. It's the nature of all existence. It isn't an option. It isn't negotiable.
Okay.
This is the broader point.
The word share.
If you begin.
Share, just using the word share.
Okay. Let me define the word share for you.
Experience its strength and hope.
The full or proper proportion or part allotted or belonging to or contributed by, owed by an individual or group. That's sharing. The full or proper proportion. In an infinite space, that means everything is shared by everyone and everything. All that are and all that is share it equally, unbound, without limits. And the considering this, it's the simplest thing because it does not change. Beginning to consider this in the face of the tirade of thoughts that come up, that create all sorts of narratives that give us this fictional story about what we need to do, have to do, must do. It isn't to say that those things can't be useful when it comes to thinking, but it's only thinking that they're useful for, not our absolute essence or our nature. It's already intact. It's already perfectly whole. If it isn't, then there is no absolute existence. There is no infinite power. There is no truth and reality. It's all subject to thought, if that's the case, and then we would each be gods running around. And that pretty much describes human history. People running around with ideas that justify killing other people in the name of trying to be superior. Pretty sick concept for a species to come up with. I would not say that's a high point. And I leap to that end just to use the broadest exposure of the totality of this organized concept that we've developed as a race that has been largely based on the idea that who we are is what we think.
Right. So if you believe that, do you think that if you were a person that brought hatred with you and put that out, do you think that would be as powerful or more powerful than if you put love?
I would say that it never has had any impact on love at all. It simply had an impact on what humans have thought of themselves.
But I'm asking you, which one would you bring?
Whenever I maintain thoughts that are not true and make believe they're true, I bring hatred, but it's limited to the thinking I'm doing. It does not have any impact on love whatsoever. The loving nature is not impacted by any of what we do, because what we're doing is delusional in those respects.
Love defeats hatred.
What's that?
Love defeats hatred.
Then it doesn't exist.
That's right.
Okay, so it doesn't. You know why it doesn't exist, Loretta? Because it's delusion that gives us the impression that righteousness is something that we should be indignant over and hurt other people as a result. It's the same. It's the same thing. It's the same thing we do in those organizations when we hear other people thinking and think that we can't have any part of them, and those people are all sick and they are all doing things that I don't want any part of.
But you don't think that way. You don't think that way if you think through love, Jack. Love.
I know, but thinking.
That's what God is. That's what the universe is. It's love.
Yes.
You see it yourself.
Yes.
So you bring love. But
I don't have to bring it. It's already here. It's already been brought.
I know that. But if you're going to have it inside, here we go. If you're going to have love and you're going to bring love with you rather than hatred, gossip.
It's already here. I don't have to bring it. It's the whole idea that it's up to me to bring it is one more idea in thought that I avoid it. Just stick with this for a second, Loretta. You're on a very critical issue here. It's the fundamental nature of this disease is making believe that my thinking brings it. My thinking does it. My thinking can express it. But I guarantee you, when I'm expressing that love, I'm not thinking at all. I'm simply expressing it.
No one mentioned the word thinking here. I said, if you bring love, that's knowing.
Okay, that's suggesting it isn't here until you bring it.
That's what I
Can't
mean.
be true.
If you bring
Can't be
love,
true. Can't be true.
yes, it can.
Okay.
I swear to
So,
God.
so then love is divisible because
Love,
it can
I said, if you
it can
bring
be
love.
there and not here. It can only be there when you bring it.
Oh, Jack, come on. Are you serious? I mean, are you literally serious? I am saying if you bring in your spirit, if you have love in your spirit,
It's already here.
instead of hatred.
It's already here right now.
Okay, well, it's not.
Right now.
It's
Right
not.
now.
I
Right
don't
now.
have hatred.
Right
I
now.
don't have hatred.
Right now.
No, I don't.
Right now.
Nope, I don't.
Okay. Right now it's here.
I don't have it anymore. It was taken away from me.
Okay. So delusion is now impossible for you. And I would say it's always been impossible for all of us. And those prickly occurrences that happen when we react to other people will never happen again if what you're saying is in fact correct. And I would suggest, given my experience, we're still struggling to some degree with these ideas and concepts because we have ideas about what's true and real that aren't true and real at all. They're just more ideas masquerading as truth and reality.
Self doesn't have that, Jack.
What's that?
What you just described, all of the stuff you're describing, thinking and overthinking and obsessing, that's not part of your spiritual self. It's just not.
Yes, it's delusion.
That's right.
Okay.
Your ego.
Okay.
Delusion. But I don't have that all the time.
I do. I struggle with it quite a bit every day.
Well, then we'll have to talk after this meeting.
Well, this whole discussion is designed to talk, so you might as well straighten me. You might as well straighten me out.
Okay. Well, then the thing is, it's like, in the big book where it talks about that psychic change, So what I'm referring to is just God. It's just God. It's in the first step. That's where the willingness to be open-minded is.
Mm-hmm.
We're that power greater in the second step. We're that power greater than ourselves. We describe that. Mind changes. This is my fourth step, not my first. Okay, I have 4 months of sobriety, but I have 21 years behind me. And it's like those 21 years I lived dry-knuckled. I didn't have spirituality.
You did. You just delusionally thought you didn't.
I didn't tap into it. I wasn't able.
There's no tapping into it. It's an ever-present state of being.
Okay, it was dry. It was dry. It's not like
you were experiencing delusion, and that is dry because there's no life in it. Water is fundamental to life forms.
But I'm talking about spirituality here, Jack. Okay, that's what
seems to me that's what we're talking about. Yes.
Yes. So when I made that choice in step 1 and step 3, and I had to make that step 3 choice, all my life. Turn your will over to God. What does that mean? Turn your will. Those are words. That didn't really, that became just words. And so for me, my spirituality or my ego just gave up. Just gave up because it doesn't work. It never works. It's thinking. But my spirituality knows, and it doesn't think. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And it grows with awareness. And it's all about love. Every bit of it. It's all in St. Anthony. I'm sorry to harp on St. Anthony's Prayer. I have a friend who's an actor, and he uses his voice in all kinds of things like video games. He's just real prolific. The way he says that prayer is so profound. So I memorized it, and he sent me his voice, and I practiced this. And I never really, I've said that prayer so many times, but I never really understood that prayer till I said it in a meeting the other day, And I came to my heart to get those words out like he does. And when I did that and you listen to that, I mean, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. I don't know all of it, but and then it's like, it is in dying to ourselves that we find eternal peace. And dying
it was in thinking our life depended on our thoughts that we thought we weren't witnessing eternal peace. We thought delusionally it wasn't there. If there is eternal peace and it is infinite, it's always there. We simply don't think it's there. And that is the problem.
Instrument. Make me an instrument.
I know, because you're admitting from a human point that you would like to actually express that love rather than express the insanity of hatred.
That's right.
Doesn't mean it's not there when you're not doing it, because it seems to be there for people that are expressing it whenever they seem to be willing, because it's ever present. It's always on the surface.
We're human. It's always.
We have life forms. Who we are is not based on our life form.
Okay, we have life forms, but we don't have to choose to think with hatred.
No.
We choose to live with love.
And when we choose hatred, it is what we are choosing.
And we change
that's sick.
And we're able to change it. Just like Michael said, it comes up and we change that.
Well, the question is, in an absolute source, if we were actually expressing it, there wouldn't be anything to change, because we wouldn't be doing it. We simply wouldn't be expressing it to need to make the corrections, to constantly think we need to fix it.
God gave us a free will. So we have all these tapes recorded in our mind of how to react and what we're doing and what we thought something meant and all of that. We're still,
you know where those things are evident?
Choose to get rid of those. And
yes, but you know why they're evident, Loretta? You know why they're evident in the moment? You know why they pop up unexpectedly, like you said earlier? Like darts?
Wait, hold on. With humility, ask God to remove those character defects. With humility.
And you think God sees those defects?
I certainly do. I don't think he sees them. No.
No. Okay. So that would be a little more accurate.
Yeah.
We're finally getting willing to let them go, which is why they seem to go, because we're no longer nurturing them. And if we're nurturing them in any way, they're going to seem to happen to us rather than be caused by us. So the darts that you started with today, those darts that seem to come at you, those things that are said that seem to be so repulsive and difficult, are all touching aspects of your thinking you don't think you're thinking. And that's the primary basis of this discussion. The obsession.
I can have an armor on, Jack.
No kidding.
Not because
kidding.
have a spiritual armor. It's in the Bible. Do you not know that from Ephesians? Look, I'm Christian. I'm sorry. So that's the way I believe, but I really believe that. The helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, belt of truth, the shoes of peace, sword of the Spirit, and the shield of faith. You put all that, there is your principles, right?
Yes. Those are all written as metaphors for an essence that doesn't change when we change. And that's primarily a point I like to make, because it begins to dispel a lot of the rumors about God coming and going and God taking and giving and God listening or not listening and all those other things we seem to lavish our attention in trying to get better, rather than begin to concede that the only impression I'm ever having that gives me the impression that I'm not absolutely in grace are caused by what I'm thinking, period.
Exactly.
Not God, not a spirit that comes and goes.
Every day you're enough for God. Every day you're enough for God. He doesn't want more. He wants more for you. I mean, that's how I feel. You're enough. God accepts us as we are. We are enough. But if we go and try and realize where our mistakes are, where we're going wrong, we can go further with spirituality because we grow, we mend, we heal, right? Right?
Well, I'm going to let you speak for your experience, Loretta.
Right?
If we're mending and healing, it sounds to me that something is not well to need to do that. And it might be worth noting, it might just be worth noting in between the breath you're about to not take, it might be worth noting that this absolute nature is absolute for each and every one of us. And as you begin to consider that in real terms, meaning now, it might become a little more obvious that the thing we're struggling with is what we're thinking only. That's it. It's thinking. God doesn't come and go. All these other manufactured narratives that we create. God is a he. God is probably not a he.
God comes and goes. I never said God comes and goes.
I'm not suggesting you said that. I'm suggesting it is a common opinion that God comes and goes, can be more or less, that spirituality is higher or lower. Those are all relative concepts attempting to assign God to thought.
They're the wrong words. So let me clarify.
It's not a matter of, Loretta, this isn't about the right words. It's not about the right words. The words are reflections of the words. The words are reflections.
Than what I said.
The words are reflections of thought.
Okay.
So if you're thinking God can be lost, you're going to say things that reflect that thought.
You don't.
So if you're saying those things, it's maybe worth talking about it and mentioning that it's probably the thinking you're talking about and thinking about, not God.
No, I'm not thinking. Telling you that, okay, what I know to be true, maybe it's not true for you.
I see, then it isn't truth.
Well, that's fine, but that's your truth, not mine.
No, that's truth is only held by each of us when we think our thoughts are real and true. It's the essence. It's the essence of mentally obsessive thinking, Loretta. It's exactly what we're talking about here. The idea that a truth can be true for you and not anyone else is not truth at all. That's a self-centered thought.
No, you're wrong. That is spirituality.
Okay.
Spirituality is truth.
Okay.
You just don't have it.
I see. I see. So truth is divisible. Truth is part-time. Truth is someplace and not here now.
Truth is not divisible.
But you just told me I don't have it.
Truth is your essence, Jack.
Thank you.
My essence is much different than yours, dear.
I see. Your essence is different. Then it's not true because there's no differences in an absolute source. There's no change in an absolute source.
You know what? You are absolutely right. I do not know why I have been talking about this all this time, but I must come on. I have my sunglasses on, but I don't care because I just want to tell you, you are absolutely right. So there you go.
I am not absolutely right. If
we're not all absolutely right.
If we're not all absolutely right, there is no rightness and there is no absolute.
No,
my point isn't one I am making. It's one I am suggesting we all share. I'm not trying to make the point. I'm simply trying to speak of it in terms that are accurate enough to begin to notice that the thinking we do about it isn't that accurate to have it thought of as something that comes and goes, grows or shrinks. All that's growing and shrinking is our thinking. All that's coming and going is our sanity and our insanity. That's it.
Well, you can get rid of some of that, Jack. I'm an alcoholic. I have a disease. I have a way of thinking things. I have to go back and change that. And you know why?
Do you? Where are you going back to, Loretta? You're going back to a place that doesn't exist, and where it exists is now.
Let me tell you, I have to change my thinking because I have to stay sober.
I would agree with that.
Thinking, if I don't change,
I'm with you on that.
Okay, so there you go. I've got 4 months. Let's make it to 5, please. Help me make it to 5.
It's just today. It's just now. The point of this discussion is noticing that if we are so bent on trying to justify what we're doing, we're missing the essence. We're not really missing it. We're just missing it within the context of the thinking we're demanding to be heard and understood in the name of making believe something's incomplete about the moment. There's no back to go to. There's no past to retrieve from. It's always in the present.
Totally agree with you. Totally. Seriously, this time I really do. I completely, totally agree with you. But don't you think sometimes, the present can be more of an adventure?
I think it's always an adventure.
And
We have just been on sick explorations that turn into disasters.
And don't you think curiosity might bring a little bit more than thinking?
I think it's natural when I'm not obsessed with my thinking.
Well, I do too.
Jack, can I tell you something?
I hope so.
I learned so much from you, and I appreciate the way that you communicate and your patience and the acceptance you have for things as they're happening. Because I, for the last 20 minutes, have been struggling with the narrative that has been happening because I have my opinions about all of it. And you've formulated your responses and your patience in a way that I wasn't considering. Mm-hmm. So again, learning that what I think doesn't create truth and reality. So that's all. Just wanted to mention that.
This discussion ultimately isn't a meeting. It isn't a program. It's just simply a chance to begin to talk in terms that might reveal a greater essence that we share rather than further refine the divisions we think are so critical to the nature of our own understanding. Because understanding is all coming from thought. Reason is all coming from thought. Logic is all coming from thought. Principles exist with or without thought. If I drop something, gravity is a principle, which I imagine it's principled, will probably allow that thing that I let go of to fall pretty consistently over and over and over. Now, if I think gravity depends on me placing the ball on the ground every time, I'm going to lose the effect and the benefit of saying, wow, the apple that fell on Newton's head fell because he was under it and it was ripe and it was ready to fall. It was ready to do what it does in nature. And I'm missing that natural aspect of my own capacity by being embroiled in thoughts and fighting and defending and constantly trying to insist on being heard. I don't want to insist on being heard. I would like to offer you all the opportunity to recognize that it's what you consider that makes the difference, not what I say. I have nothing to say. If you don't have any knowledge beyond the words that I speak, you're never going to see any of this, other than in words, in ways that just create new words and new wraparounds and new theories and new opinions and new this, that, and the other. And that's as quick to do that, I know, because when I feel the defensiveness in some way, I know that I'm harboring a thought about truth and reality that isn't true. It's not real. These are self-centered ideas that I've maintained so long that I don't believe are even happening. And that's the bounty of this conversation, starting to say, wow, I've got a lot of this going on when I don't even think I have it going on, because I think I'm doing the thing right enough to be eliminating the problem when in fact I'm still witnessing these reactive tendencies and these impulsive tendencies and these compulsive tendencies.
All right. So
if you don't have obsessive thoughts, then you're not reactive and you're not impulsive and you're not compulsive. But if you look at your experience, you'll probably see that there are instances of reactivity and impulsivity and compulsivity, and none of those are ever healthy. And I think of reaction differently than a sane response, which would be responsibility, the ability to respond, the ability to actually look at something broadly enough to include an objective observation rather than simply the subjective ideas I have about my own understanding and my own reason and my own logic and my own conclusions. And it begins to actually melt the differences, the seeming differences in this spatial dynamic that we're witnessing. And rather than make believe all we are is human and all we are is what we think, start to see that the essence of our existence is dramatically greater because there is no limit to it. So as much as I can grow, it's still infinitely greater until I begin to say, wow, if that is in fact the natural state of existence right now, and we all share it, starting to think about that would certainly introduce something to thinking that wouldn't be debatable. So I wouldn't be subjecting it to this constant cavalcade of reason and conflict and inner turmoil, trying to get to the resolution that's already here. It's already here and it's now.
And just watching what just occurred and clearly the action that resulted, it's I have a friend of mine, very good friend of mine. We've spoken about him before, and he's very volatile. He's very, at the same time loving and very supportive. And I really appreciate his relationship. But there's certain things that I can say and he just snaps and he's gone and he's yelling and he's this and he's that. And I'm just looking at him like, how the hell did you get there? And part of me wants to respond and like check him or whatever you want to call it. And I realized,
if he gets so flustered by him, they're probably not true then.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, okay, that's a hill you want to die on. I'm like, cool, then let's just enjoy the hike, dude. Like,
part of this too.
But my point is that I want to respond. I always want to respond, and I have to make sure that he knows that he's wrong or I don't agree. And it's like, fuck, is that even adding value though? Probably not.
Well,
and I just
you can see the web though. It's kind of like going to a racquetball court and hitting the ball and not expecting it to bounce back when we do that thing with somebody else. We actually help encourage the reactivity by being reactive. And I'm not talking about behaving in ways. My sense is it doesn't really matter what we do. If we're willing to let what we're doing be what we're doing, we're going to learn an enormous amount from it, because it's the things we think we shouldn't be doing and the things we think we should be doing when in fact we're not noticing what we're doing. And the immediacy of that is at least honest enough to be happening, however sick it is, however demented it is, however perverted it is, however insane it is. Until I begin to actually allow the experience to be the experience, I'm always off on a cavalcade trying to figure out what to do, how to be better, how to do this, how to do that. I'm in this mental tennis match with a self that doesn't exist, imagining that talking more to my thinking is going to resolve it, rather than see that that is the exact source of the problem. I keep relying on thinking as my source, relying on reason as my solution, relying on logic, making sense. Well, that doesn't make sense, I say to other people. Well, sense doesn't argue. Sense just provides raw data. It's our thinking that turns our sense into whether it's good or bad, we like it or we don't like it. It's our thinking that comes to those. Thinking has a perfectly designed nature to help guide us. So to misuse it by making believe it's all that we are and all that we have and really true, it ends up turning it into a liability when in fact it's a great asset. I don't know what happened to Loretta, but she disappeared.
Oh, I could tell you.
So what would you say this meeting is about? If somebody was to say, what are you discussing right now? What did you talk about? What would you say?
Since you've asked that question probably 30 times, Anthony, why don't you tell us? If the answers have not gone through yet, let me hear what it is that drives the question.
Because I'm thinking that spirituality becomes an interesting subject, because that's what got the whole discussion going. I was happy I asked that. I was kind of joking when I said it. How do you become more spiritual? And that's where the conflict happened. Well,
again, the premise of the idea that you can become more means you can become less. And that's a thinking function. That's not a being function. That's not a knowing function. That's not an absolute function. Because in an absolute state, there is no more or less. There is no here and there. It's just an absolute ever-present state of knowing. If that exists, it must be what is happening right now. And I don't mean that in some theoretical way. I mean in some actual way, factual. So it's here now, absolutely. It's not based in time and space because it's always beginning new. There's no end to something that always begins new. And there's no beginning to it either, because it's the infinitesimal ability of the new to be new means that it's constantly new. There's no division between old and new. There's no time in it. It's literally just an ever-present nature of essence. And if that's here and what we're doing with it is giving us the impression that it isn't, it's only what we're thinking that's giving us that impression. That's where the disease is. That's where the dis-ease, the lack of ease, the discomfort, the disturbance comes from. It's just what we're thinking about it. We're thinking about it in spatial terms and relative terms, rather than recognizing we have an infinite knowing sense that's aware. Why not think of it from that point of view, where there is no thinking, and then introduce thinking to it? And now thinking does what it's designed, which is to express it naturally, where we don't have to think about what to do. We know what to do and we say it. And it comes out of our mouth before we even think, and we think, wow, I never would have thought of that.
I felt bad when Loretta said she didn't have that spiritual feeling, you know.
Why did you feel bad, Anthony?
It was the empathy. Yeah, I have empathy for others. It was sad because it was be more than just a discussion at that point.
You know, the greatest empathy you have, Anthony?
What?
Is self-pity for the pitiful self you think you are. That is the source of this idea we have, that we're going to become compassionate for others while we're actually inducing an opinion that we're helping them get worse by maintaining ideas about a self that doesn't exist as being all that they are and all that they think. And it's the same for each of us. My sense is, if there's an essence, what we do wrong appears differently to each of us and seems unique to each of us, because we're trying to insist that we can be separate, that we can be divided, that we can be alone, that we can have our own truth. We're trying desperately to maintain that idea because it isn't true. There would be no desperation in it if it were true, because we'd never have to think about it. There's no thinking in knowing. That's the book says we'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. What used to baffle me is that I immediately go to more thinking as the result of my thinking, and wonder why things keep getting worse, why I keep feeling upset. Why does depression not go away? Why does this inner experience that I'm having, this inner landscape of my experience, seem to be very, very difficult to satisfy all the time? I can't get enough. Constantly, I'm looking for more. Why? Because I'm thinking thoughts that have no basis. How is that going to be filled? They're already full of emptiness. How much more full can they get? They got nothing. They don't exist.
I heard they were interviewing this big executive right now. I was going to want to talk about this, but he was talking about the opposite of failure is success. And he said he realized that when you get to that point of thinking you're going to fail and you just go that next day, that's success. And he said they asked him what his biggest weakness was. And he goes, probably my compassion or my caring, because that makes him very sensitive. Some people say he's too sensitive, he said. So that's the interesting part, is the opposite side. I think he's right that the caring can be something that hurts you, distract. At some point there's a fine line there. Where
only when you think thinking is true and real are there opposites involved. You know what the opposite of the infinite is?
The infinite.
Yes. You know why?
No.
There's no difference. There's no change in it. There's no difference in it. So it doesn't have the opposites like we experience in thought. Really?
Is it possible that there is an opposite?
You know what the base root of really is? Real. Reality.
Don, why are you shaking your head? I must ask.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony asked an interesting question, which he has asked before. And
thanks, bud. Love this guy.
He says, what is this meeting about? And the reason we, not just Anthony, ask these kinds of questions repeatedly is because there becomes a, in this, like this belief oriented meeting today, it gets a little circuitous. And when that happens, we ask the same questions over again, because again, we're stumped.
Well, and the more we rely on thinking, the more it's going to go around and around and around. It's like it just comes and it goes, and it 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 comes and it goes. And we wonder why. Well, there's no wonder in it at all. The reason is because we're nurturing it. We're paying attention to it. We're thinking about it. We're thinking it's going to get us somewhere. Rather than concede, we are in the place that we can't get because we're always there. We can't get there because there's no place to get when you're always in the place you always are. It's absolutely.
But we need language to have discussion. And because language incorporates questions, and even with you not giving answers, we are still looking for dialogue. I mean, that's what this is about. This is about discussion. You've said that before. So when Anthony asks a question like that, and I ask a question like that, you know, when we get into this, I don't know what this has been about besides belief delusion. I sit and I weather whatever storm is coming this way. And after just listening and moving through it, you know, sometimes, you know, I want to say something also. And that's what discussion is it not, Jack?
Well, in a knowing sense, there are no questions because there is no doubt. So in something that's not questionable, like an absolute source, there's no questions, there's no doubt. So it isn't a function of, my sense is discourse, which is where most discussion evolved out of, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. They talked about discourse being a guidance system to looking at reality and truth and finding things that were reliable enough to discuss. But what that included was a lot of discussion that wasn't reliable to begin to pare down and begin to look at what essence is. What could we decide? I mean, Aristotle talked about the atom existing before there was ever a microscope or telescope even developed. He got the essence of something that existed. Where would that knowing come from to consider that if he wasn't looking clearly at what was happening in thought?
Someone way before that time gave it to him. But anyway, I see what you're saying. But this is discussion.
Yes.
And without discourse getting sharpened down to create, you know, you talk about natural and honesty to create, you know, that moment in time where we can agree that, you know, everything has happened and is happening and so on and so forth. We need to speak to each other.
Well, my sense is if we had actually conceded, see, we don't need to agree that everything's happening for it to be happening. We don't have to agree that truth is true for it to be true. We don't have to agree that reality is reality for it to be reality. And to begin to concede that is to begin to see that we are products of it rather than the creators of it. And most discussion, as you can even see here, is often spent arguing and fighting over ideas that somebody has that aren't ideal and aren't true enough to go unspoken. So while I'm repetitive in what I say, and I imagine some of it is defensive because my sense is if truth is true, it would probably be true. I mean, that may be going out on a limb, but it seems pretty obvious that if you're accountable and responsible, that things would add up. And to me, truth being true would be true, and reality being real would be real. I don't have to understand what that actually means in all of its ramifications for it to exist and be doing what it's doing right now in terms of all the different various expressions that life expresses. I don't have to understand any of that for it to be happening. That is a major concession, in my experience, to having a conversation that can begin to immediately spot the inequities and the discrimination and the opposition and the repression and the suppression and all of the issues that go into a defensive conversation. So it turns it from being reactive to being proactive and being repulsive to being not impulsive, but to creating a beat that you can sense is aligned with reality and truth, because the common nature of that would be having thoughts that we never even thought to think of. that are so much bigger than the ones we like to maintain because they're just naturally beginning to peer into an absolute state of being that we know and simply haven't been good at expressing in that discussion.
Mm-hmm. I understand what you say.
I know you do.
John, since you're here, I must say that I was listening to your conversation with Jack on a couple of podcasts that you guys recorded on the flight. I was going to Chicago last week. I loved you two's dialogue.
Yeah.
I love the way John's mind works and the answers and the questions that he had for you, Jack. So I just wanted to say I appreciated that while you're on here, because it was a very good exchange. It was enlightening, to say the least.
Thank you, and I'm jealous of your hair.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to keep it for as long as I can. My dad doesn't have any, and he was much younger than me when he lost it. So I'm fighting a good fight.
The baldness is from your mom's side.
Well, my grandfather was also bald. So yeah, I mean, I'm thinning more than I'd like to admit, but I'm definitely doing well.
He was just trying to give you a compliment, John. You didn't have to turn it back on him.
What?
He gave me one.
He just wanted to hear you he wanted to hear you just say thanks, man, because he's giving you a big compliment.
Anthony doesn't feel as though
he's garbled on my end. I couldn't understand.
So Anthony's not feeling like
he just wanted to hear you say that. He just wanted to hear you just take. Sometimes people have a hard time accepting compliments.
Yes. Yes. And I came in on this whole thing about at a time where what's her name was talking about what's her name? Loretta, thanks. It was talking about I don't know, all kinds of things. But what I came in on is that there's things that she disliked and stuff. So I always look at all these things that that I hate, or this person or that person. What I came to understand while conversing with Jack over the last 25 years is that the thing that I hate and I'm exhausted by is really me.
Oh yeah.
Bingo. The mirror.
Well, and here's the beauty, the even more beautiful job. It isn't even you, it's what you think of you that you're sick of.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've been maintaining this constant obsessive need to make believe your thinking's going to someday sort you out and become adequate enough to put you to rest, when in fact you've been at absolute rest while you've been choosing to do that, and wonder what's so fucking sick about that. What's wrong with this? Well, it's the whole idea that you are who you think, because thoughts and reality isn't, thoughts are a product of reality. They aren't the producers of reality. So we have the perfect capacity to express reality. That's intuition. Intuition is defined, by the way, is knowledge beyond reason. What does that mean? There's no thinking in it. There's no logic in it. It's preposterous to thinking and logic and reason. That's why the reactivity is so often seen in the fights for the thoughts people have. If somebody's fighting, I know they're thinking something that isn't true. It doesn't have to be the thing they're fighting for. It can very easily be something that is underlying that gives the impression that it's something not here now, but it's here now enough for them to be doing it. And it's the same goes for me. The actual principle of what is wrong is principled enough to always be wrong. So that's it. If I think wrong is going to be right, I got a conflict. If I think what's happening isn't happening and something else should be happening, I've got a conflict right now. I'm creating that conflict in a thought. That's it. It isn't reality that's conflicted. It isn't reality that's complicated. It's my thinking about reality, about truth, about God, about spirit, about infinite that's conflicted. Nothing more, nothing less. John, you froze. But your tie looks
Thank you. I'm opening a garage door.
I see. Okay.
Manually.
So interestingly, as these things are contemplated, and we've witnessed these moments in our discussion, everybody tends to get quiet. And a lot of people say, I just don't know what to say. Very interesting. Because we tend to be, when in our reactiveness, we know exactly what to say because we're defending something that's absolutely insane. We're sure that we need to, don't interrupt me. I need to be, all those kind of things. We just talk through other people because you got to hear my story and my narrative for me to get it out because I want to make sure you know what I'm talking about and you understand me. Well, there's no chance anybody's going to ever understand insanity. No chance.
Well, we try.
We do.
I've probably sat through, that I can remember, 4 or 5 of those types of exchanges, and only one was not like the other, and he actually told you to fuck off, and I think I appreciated that one more than anything.
Yeah, well, he was honest, and you know, my sense is
but seeing enough of them now, I see where I was like, oh, he was actually honest. He wasn't lying.
Yes.
He wasn't convincing you. He was telling you directly what he believed he thought was true. And he was being honest with himself at the same time. And seeing the difference in the exchanges, I'm easily able to see, oh, you're making sure we understand and know what you're trying to tell us. And you're imposing those ideas on us versus just accepting the fact that, you know what, I don't like the fact that you're not agreeing with me. So you can, screw off and I'm done with you. Cool.
Well, and it helped me see that relationships break off typically on thank you or fuck you. And the fuck you generally has a greater chance, my experience is, and in the Kabbalah, in early basic Kabbalah, they have a premise that says the first impression of someone you don't like has a greater chance of becoming a lifelong friend than someone you immediately like. Because getting used to somebody you immediately like means you're not going to like when they go wrong. Because what you thought of them at first is, well, you think they should. If somebody's wrong and you build on that, you now have now you know the worst. You've been through it together. That's a very redemptive quality. Speaking of Easter Sunday and the resurrection and actually rising above it all, those are all metaphoric for this fact that we're already above it, making believe that we're below it. And it's not even above it. It's not even in a spatial dynamic. It's something that's impossible to put words around. And yet we can point to it because we each know it. And we wouldn't know it and get the reference if we didn't know it. We know it. We know it. We know we're aware of it. We're aware of it. And to discount that in any way is to take the essence of our existence and make believe that it's only thought that determines our existence. And again, that contemplation tends to be very quiet. My sense is if God speaks in silence. What would that mean? An absolute present state of peace, because there is no conflict in something that's absolute. There is no turmoil in it. Peace would be the essence of our experience in our present, and it seems to be what people find when they meditate and take a minute out to just unravel their thoughts and notice that there's an essence there that always seems to be there whenever they're willing to look. And if it's there when we don't think it's there, starting to think in those terms changes the way we think about it, because it starts to put responsibility on the opinions we have for the thinking we're doing, rather than the essence of truth and reality and God and all these other things we make believe are complicated and difficult and hard to understand. What's hard to understand is why I keep relying on something that's completely misunderstood as my only form of understanding. That becomes very difficult, John, to your point. I start to think that it's who I think I am, that self-pity is actually pitying a self that doesn't exist. We're giving it credit, and it's so weak and vulnerable as being this cheap, this lousy idea about reality and truth that's a little child in the corner suffering, and we even imagine it when it's delusion. There's nothing there to it. We're trying to feel sorry for it to give it credit. We're trying to defend it to give it credit. There's nothing to even defend but the idea there's something there that's real. That's the insanity of it.
But Jack, if I may grab this pause in your voice, what's also really important is that the make believe aspect relates to everything. Loretta was talking about her beliefs. Beliefs are what is beloved of you. And we choose.
It's beloved of thought.
Hang on a second. Hang on. That's a comma. You have to understand that it's all made up.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say reality is made up or truth is made up, but within the life form, the human life form, what we think of it is all made up. Because reality and truth apparently provided the potential for us to think. So it must have existed well before we thought, as an ever-present state of being and consciousness. And that form of consciousness would undermine any form of limited thought and limited reality and individuation of that, because it wouldn't allow any mining of that to ever be successful. You can't mine for something that's essentially the nature of our existence.
However, anything that comes out of anyone's mouth is all made up.
Well, I would say that would be only if we have never achieved an intuitive expression. And my sense is that those expressions, when they're spoken, are actually, if they're actually spoken in ways that we're not thinking about, are actually a form of knowing that conveys well beyond the words, because it's really addressing the totality of our unified existence rather than the divisive nature of the words that we use to try to carve out some ideas that we have and reinforce the idea that they happen to be true and real.
And even your favorite words like truth, nature, those words are made up. And
yes, they're words.
With that, hang on. And with that dialogue, there is the same belief structure. Although so-and-so may believe this and you may believe that, and you want to speak louder because you think you're right, so on and so forth. It is all make-believe, like you said. That make-believe does not just add up to what you're talking about and then be diminished by some godly notion.
Well, if there is an essence that's infinite, it doesn't matter what I think or say, it's infinite and it's conscious and it's aware and it's ever present. And I would say that considering that, even in words, would be to begin to dispel, literally take the words apart, dispel the opinions, and begin to reckon with the fact that there is an essence, sort of like physicists. Physicists keep looking for the essence, but the essence has never been undiscovered. It's always been essential to the makeup of their ability to look at things that seem to be invisible and seem not to exist until they look at them. But those things exist right now for all of us in ways that we can't even fathom, or we would be talking about them honestly in ways that would be accurate and not divisive, in the ways that even in science, there's people and groups that hover around certain ideas and fight for those ideas in that dynamic, that thesis, antithesis, synthetic process of what change effectively is. It doesn't mean the change is reality. It just means that it's an ongoing process engaged with people, bodies that are designed to function within a relative form. Doesn't mean that's the epitome of our existence. It doesn't mean that's the nature of our knowing. It simply means that if there is a nature that's infinite, that would be the essence of our existence. And what we're doing with it would be highly impacted by the thinking we're doing about it if we're inaccurate in that thinking.
I understand. And those are your favorite words. And they are still make-believe.
Yet, if something exists that's absolute and infinite and unlimited and omnipotent and omniscient and all-powerful, it doesn't require words or thought to be. And there is the concession that begins to allow for an infinite source to be an infinite source, regardless of what I think. And now my thinking starts to operate on a plane where I'm no longer conflicted over making believe my words get me there, because I begin to recognize that the essence of the present nature of all of our existence has always been there, and there is no other there to be. There is no then, there is no there. There is only now. There is only the essence of presence. And that presence would be here now with us, regardless of what we think about it. And it is the essence of our existence. If it didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be thinking about it. The fact that we can is a byproduct of its potential to give us the freedom. Because it's free, it allows us to do whatever we want, including kill ourselves and killing others, to descend to the lowest potential capacity rather than reflect the greatest potential capacity, which would be to flourish and to be abundant rather than scarce and divisive, and figuring that self-indignation is justified means killing ourselves or others. We can justify it.
Well,
So-
I'm sorry.
While it can't be spoken of, we've spent a whole civilization trying to argue against it. Why would we be arguing against something that doesn't exist?
Maybe we've spent many civilizations doing that.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about all that's ever existed in terms of human forms or being forms that have the capacity to think freely and choose thoughts sufficient enough to make believe that all we are is what we think.
So I had a thought.
I'm sure.
If you guys want to hear it.
What if we don't?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So everybody's sitting down, right? I don't want you to fall and get hurt. So my thought is that the perfect discourse about the thing that we discuss would be an absolutely silent meeting.
I thought that too before.
So I would say that's the nature of our existence, John. That's exactly the nature of our existence, is an ever-present silent knowing that doesn't speak up because it has nothing to fight for. It doesn't argue because it doesn't think of itself. It doesn't have a self to think of, so it doesn't have any individuation in it. And that would be exactly the voice of God, in my sense, is silent and all-knowing, because I already know. If I know that, I know it. And the only struggle I'm having with it is thinking in terms that are aligned with it. And so what I preoccupy myself with are all kinds of thoughts that aren't quite expressing it. Yet it's already expressed. It doesn't require me to express it to be. It's just that as a human, my capacity isn't potentially realized in that limited thought. It's realized to the degree that I limit it, but that wouldn't be the capacity at the most abundant, most fruitful, most beneficial, most useful level.
So it was a good idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with your idea too, John. I'll summarize this as quick as I can. But my wife and I were having a challenging morning. We were not starting off on the right tone years ago, and I had spoken to a friend that talked about coming back from a silent retreat for 2 weeks, and she was just talking about how she learned to communicate and use different methods without using words. And she was in a community of people. I think it was like 24 people. And so that next morning, for some reason, again, me and my wife were not talking to each other. And I wrote her a note when she walked out of the house because she went to go do something. And I said, we're not speaking to each other for the rest of the day. Let's find another way to communicate. But I don't want to talk to you. Please don't talk to me. Respect my space. It didn't start off very well. But by the end of the day, we were fine. Everything was fine. And the best way I can summarize it is we weren't messing it up with words that were minimizing the energy and the sharing we wanted to show each other. And by the next day, my wife told me that she had to figure out how to express love, how to show appreciation for me without saying it. And that was challenging for her because she figured that she always relied on words to get her point across. And it was very eye-opening for both of us to just not speak, not for a reason, we weren't mad at each other for the entire day, but our tone was just not starting off well. And I didn't like the direction it was going to go. And I could tell I wasn't going to make it any better. And I just said, let's try something that we haven't tried and let's just not speak. And we both stayed home. And it ended up being a very enlightening day, to say the least, because it's exactly what you just said. I don't think enough people even consider how to communicate without using words.
Talking is probably the greatest expression of obsessive thinking. Because to think thoughts are real is to then talk about them, to insist people listen to and understand us. And the funny thing is, nobody ever feels like anybody understands them because they're talking gibberish and about insanity and about all these limited ideas that we think are true and real constantly, chronically. Because there's nothing there other than our own insistence that we continue to perpetuate them. Talking always comes as a result of thinking. If we're thinking obsessively, we're going to talk obsessively. I just happen to talk obsessively about the obsession. But the absolute nature, as you pointed to, John, it is silent. It is at peace. It is not changing. What could be simpler than to know that there is something reliable that has never changed? We always look for the answer. We're searching for the answer. We're searching for simplicity in a new form of complication in thinking, rather than conceding that essence is the essence of our existence. It's always existed. It's why meditation gives us the impression that all of a sudden it's there. It's always
and that's
there.
where Loretta disengaged, because she said that it's not always there, right? That was her struggle.
Well, she seemed to say that it was and it wasn't, and but whatever she's going through, whatever, I'm not really an expert at dealing with this. I appreciate your words, Michael, but all I want to do is maintain a course that seems to be bent on a discussion that's based in principles that are absolute. Because principles are absolute, and
spirituality is absolute. John, what do you think about being able to be more spiritual? Is that possible, or that's not a concept?
I'm losing you guys.
Can you be more spiritual? Is that possible to be more spiritual, or no?
Are you hearing, John?
I'm losing you guys.
He's not hearing us. It isn't, Anthony. It doesn't mean we can't express more spirituality per se.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's the difference is, if we're expressing obsessive thoughts all the time, we're pretty good at that. The chances are we're not doing the most beneficial thing that we're capable of doing. And that our incapacity is going to feel to us like something less than. And we're going to feel less than doing those things. Those consequences that we face in terms of those feelings we have and that doubt we have about the self we think we are earned by what we're doing and acting on the behalf of those thoughts. They're absolute clear consequences of that thinking. It doesn't mean our expression is at its maximum. It doesn't mean the bounty is at the maximum on our human capacity. It means that we're thinking scarce thoughts, so we're afraid of losing what we have and not getting enough. And all those thoughts come consequentially to that form of thinking.
Yeah. John, can you hear us now?
Can you hear now?
Yeah.
So Anthony had asked whether you think we can be more or less spiritual.
Yeah, is that possible to be more spiritual?
You guys are stepping all over each other. I can't hear you when you do that.
So he asked if you can be more spiritual.
Me, no.
Or we can.
I don't know about you. I can't speak for you.
That was funny.
Well, if we share something that's infinite, though, you could speak for everyone.
You think we share something that's infinite.
Well, if there's an infinite, would it be possible that it's not infinite? Of course, now he freezes.
Yeah.
Anthony, you asked me, so I'll tell you, I don't think spirituality begins with my religion, if you will. And I think that's the disagreement that I have when it comes to spirituality, because if you're saying that people that aren't necessarily religious aren't spiritual, I disagree. So
what I mean, I don't know. I'm an atheist from New York. What do I know?
Yeah, right. So yeah, he's not spiritual according to some people, but again, I think that's the fault in the concept. And again, back to Jack's point, the idea and your thoughts of what spirituality is. And if you're relating it to God and your God only, well, then we wouldn't agree on that. But that's more so me imposing those thoughts of what spirituality is versus what Jack is arguing that it just is, and spirituality just existing.
But on the same note, while he's arguing what is, he says that his God has a voice.
Yeah, that's a little weird, Jack.
I don't think I said that. I think I agreed with you that it was silent.
Yeah, you did.
I heard she. So
what's that?
I took notes.
And what did I say?
You said that your God has a voice.
Well, the voice would be silence. It's a knowing. It's
your
a knowing.
God has a voice, but it's silent.
Yes, it's
there
a
you
knowing.
go.
I love it.
It's a knowing.
You said it again.
It's a knowing awareness that isn't found in thought. It's what intuition is described as.
Right, and I would say that is all made up in your head.
Okay. And I would say if it exists, it has nothing to do with my head at all. And yet
and
everything.
I would say that the perfect usage of your words, which are always great,
Yeah.
the if. The if.
Because it's up to each of us
perfect.
to come to I can't tell you what to think. I can make suggestions and offer concepts, and you're welcome to agree or not agree or fight them or come up with some other confusion. But if you're suffering and struggling with obsessive thinking, I would suggest that it's what you're thinking that's causing that, not some greater force. And my experience with atheism is that atheism becomes your God in the sense that it's a diminishment of all the other ideas about God that have not been correct because they've been in conflict with one another. And for the most part, what humans put their hands in turns into a fight, or puts their hands on through human history. It's always been a fight. Religion has been at the primary center of many of those fights. And I would say if that's the case, this seemingly monotheistic God that everybody seems to argue on behalf of must not be monotheistic at all for it to be so divisive and so capable of destruction. And I would say that's a self-centered God. That's a thought God. That's a iconic egoism and egocentrism. And my experience is that's normally what people who are atheist are fighting against, is that presumption, while in fact there's a greater sense of awareness that there's something pure and absolute that isn't divisive and isn't bound by either religion or philosophy or extremism or anything that has to do with thought. It is an essence that is essential enough to be essential to everything without having to even be thought of to be all that it is.
Yeah. Hey, John, what's it going to take to get you on board with this idea that there's one central source of power? You're not on board yet. We need to get you on board.
He's already on board with it. His atheism is that central. That's the central power.
Don't talk for me, please, sir.
I will as I do. I will as I do.
When I talk to you about, this Abrahamistic above, which by the way, yielded hail the size of marbles 2 days ago in thunder and lightning that I have never witnessed in my life. They were piled up like 5 inches high in my little backyard and like 12 inches high up against the fence. And it brought to mind this story that my mom used to tell when she was alive about when she was a little girl and golf ball size hail came down and killed people in Brooklyn, New York. And I always used to say, "Oh, Ma, come on, knock it off." That's ridiculous, right? And then when I moved to Texas, I witnessed this kind of phenomenon, and these are the big ones, And anyway, so I look up and I know a lot about the historical references to what has happened and what hasn't happened, and this well, you call it, an evolve to monotheistic, and I say it's a devolvement. But anyway, yeah, I listen to everybody, and I don't have a conflict, Jack, with any of this. To me, it's wonderful discourse. You know that.
Well, but you also struggle with mentally obsessive thinking. And if we're here to talk about anything, it's interesting that we'll often dismiss it in the name of coming to some level of understanding that seems to be at ease. And my sense is we've done that so spectacularly well that we'll often live with things that are not comfortable, thinking they are comfortable and wondering why we feel depressed and friction and create circumstances and manifest circumstances and consequences that seem to be wholly unusual and unlikable and unwantable when we've been directly responsible for that creation.
Yeah, and you spoke very eloquently this morning about that with Loretta, or whatever her name is, and I, yeah, you don't want to be in my head, that's for sure.
Well,
Hey,
I actually, but
John,
my sense, John, if I have any, is that the things we think we're doing alone are very, 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 very indifferent. They're not different to what we're all doing together. If we have a natural basis for existence that's the same, the chances are what we're doing and thinking that we're individually doing it in ways that other people aren't doing it is exactly what gives us the impression that we're separate and alone and divided and need to fight and all those sorts of things that come up. That's still part of this sort of drama that we create, this narrative that we create that's really just a fiction. It's really just it's an autobiography.
Absolutely.
What's that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's a fiction, but it'll wear
but
you
it's
out.
your fiction.
Yeah, no.
I'm losing you.
Yes, sir.
There you are. If you turn your video off when you're driving, it might give you better reception.
Hang on, I'm not that skilled at this shit. So
Oh yeah, good tip.
Are you a passenger or are you driving?
Well, both, Jack, because we're doing it all.
Doing it together. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So starting to at least look at that accurately and starting to notice it and starting to concede it and starting to notice that we're responsible for it in every respect. And it's not just the ones we think we are and the things we think to ourselves. It's also everyone else. Because if I've been able to help people become more reactive by going along with these sort of charades that we all do and backslap each other and say, you're going to be fine if you just keep doing this, that, and the other. Well, we've really not even addressed the source of the actual problem. We've given them sort of topical solutions that seem to be solutions that aren't, because they just basically perpetuate the problem.
That's the problem. You need one more Ferrari. That's what it was. Damn it. That was the answer.
So if we're operating in that way, we've been very much responsible for all of the other indignation and all of the other consequential conflicts that have arisen. It isn't responsibility when it's thought of in a principled sense, isn't something I have and you don't. It's something we all share. If I'm 100% responsible, then it's because we're all responsible for the experience we're having. And while our experience may not be the sum total of life, it certainly is happening sufficiently to be experienced right now and might be worth having in a way that would be well beyond the imagination we have of what's possible now and what's impossible now, because so much of that impossibility and possibility is based on only what I think, based on my experience and based on the defensiveness I have and the thoughts I have that I think are true, that aren't.
I'm completely sold on that. I understand why I waste a lot of energy on that, and even though I am absolutely giddy today, I could easily.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that word.
Right. So my point is that I could easily turn the corner.
Yes.
But it's just I'm in
Well, you can as
somehow-
easily turn the
somehow-
corner as to think there's a corner to turn.
I'm stuck between a solid and a liquid.
Well, that would be steam,
No, sublime, I said.
sublime.
I'm
Yeah.
somehow sublime, stuck between a solid and a liquid, I said.
Yeah. Well, if there is an if the ever presence is current, meaning now, and a current like a fluid moving thing, then most of my life I've spent trying not to express that fluidity and that current, that literal movement, that we call it emotive and emotion. Think of emotion. It's motion. It's some fluid energy running through our veins, running through our systems that is dynamic and alive and aware. It's a function of life. It's a possibility of life that we're experiencing and expressing. And if I've spent my time trying to become numb to it because it's overwhelming, and all that's overwhelming are the limited thoughts I have that are getting overrun like a dam getting too much water in it, and I'm afraid the limits are going to fall apart, when I begin to see the limits is only something I'm defending because they have no basis, it becomes very easy to notice that it's delusional to imagine I've been defending anything at all. There's nothing there. There's nothing to fight for. There's absolutely nothing but a thought that isn't true or real that would need any defense, because if it were true or real, I wouldn't have to think about it at all to be everything. And just start to distinguish this a little bit. It isn't because it's distinguished in any way, but because we've been thinking of one thing as solely the source of our existence, which would be thinking about thinking, to the exclusion of the actual nature of our existence. That just beginning to consider that there's some distinction between them allows the fluidity that exists between them to become much more obvious and much more accessible and much more available, because I'm not doing everything I can to make believe it's not happening. And it all happens in the present, as all has ever happened. Think during the week, whenever you're wondering where you are, look at your feet. Notice where you are, that you're always where you are whenever you're wondering where you are. Whenever you think you should be somewhere else, notice that you must be somewhere to be thinking you should be somewhere else. You're confirming the place you're in rather than thinking of it as some place you shouldn't be. We've created warped thinking that seems to be true and real because we can manipulate ourselves into just about every concoction known and be intoxicated by those concoctions and have our bodies release adrenaline and other things that give us a momentary sense of satisfaction, oxytocin and all of the serotonin and the dopamine and all that stuff, and wear our bodies out of chemicals that we would naturally have when they're needed, rather than for unnecessary emergencies that we're creating by imposing ideas that are completely untrue as though they're true in the present, and creating present traumatic stress and wondering why we feel anxious all the time and constantly have to ask more and more and more questions. We ask more and more questions and seek more and more because we don't think the answers are where we are, and we don't think what we're thinking we think what we're thinking is questionable enough to be asking questions all the time, rather than notice the doubt that's created in the thinking we're doing is exactly why we keep asking more questions, rather than concede things that are absolutely the case right now. We are where we are all the time. Look where you are when you're thinking about where you should be, and notice that you're always where you are thinking about something else. Same with past and future. Same with other people. You're always as you are, where you are, when you are, where you are, and why you are. All the questions are answered in the immediacy of that knowing present state. And if that's absolute, it's what we know. And we go to great lengths to pretend it's what we think we know that is primary to our existence. While we're always present, while we're always with everything happening simultaneously, to the present, everything else that's happening is happening. So we have everything in the moment, and to think everything isn't enough would certainly be an addictive trend to make believe it's somewhere else with someone else or more or less of something else. It's just a lie. And lies only exist on the basis of being thought to be true. So they're always defensive. They're always reactive. They're always impulsive. They always drive to compulsions because we want to escape the repulsive nature of the experience. And what do we do when we drink? We actually maintain it. What do we do when we drug? We maintain the problem because we're treating the effect, how we feel, rather than the cause, what we're thinking. So Easter Sunday, by the way, is about resurrection. Transcending, recognizing that there is no bondage in reality or truth, or an infinite source, or a God of any real God, rather than the words we use to make believe that it only represents the thoughts we have about God. That is transcendent by nature. Why? It can't be held captive. It's not even transcendent suggests it's beyond. It can't even be beyond, like metaphysical is beyond the physical. This can't be beyond. It must be within and without, simultaneously, things that are incomprehensible to rational thinking. It doesn't mean they don't exist. And yet, isn't it ironic that we come up with delusional ideas that are illusions and imagined and make believe they're true and real, while we're willing to dismiss that if we can't imagine it and we can't think about it, it must not exist. Interesting that we would discount everything in the name of nothing. Absolutely nothing. Non-existence. Suicide's at an all-time high. That's an attempt to get away from the thinking that gives us the impression that we don't even exist. Why bother living? Why bother continuing? Why bother having the potential to do any more? Because the more we're doing is only making things worse. We know it. We feel it. Depression is an example of it. All these mental anxiety disorders are all examples of our awareness. They're telling us something is wrong. And to make believe what we need to do is develop a better ego is maintaining the idea that it even exists at all. It's a thought thinking about a thought. We don't think to ourselves. We don't talk to ourselves. We think to our thinking, and we talk to our thinking. Think about that. Think about how redundant that needs to be to give any sense of life at all, when it's life that produces the potential and love that gives us the opportunity to be so crazy and doesn't beat us into any submission, but the experience itself becomes sick enough eventually to allow us the chance to notice. If pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth, it seems as though we are hell-bent committed to the pain until we're willing to say enough is enough. And I don't need to go any deeper. Those moments of clarity are simply conceding, I have no obligation to go any further. I do not need to go any deeper. I do not need to dig any further. It's all here. It's all now. And if I begin to concede that, my thinking will straighten out naturally because it's aligning to something that's accurate. And to John's point, if it's all make-believe, then all I'm doing is fantasizing about it. If it's real and true, when I act on it and begin to apply that thinking to what's real and true and begin to realize that reality and truth, if they exist, don't exist within my thinking or anyone's thinking. We are the product of those things. We are already in it, and we are of it even more than in it. It's just our nature, whatever that nature may be. If it's infinite, it's absolute, it's where we are always as we are. To think in those terms allows our human capacity to express reality and express truth in a knowing way that doesn't include thinking. And that's what the definition of intuition is. Knowledge beyond reason. Why would it be beyond reason? Because it doesn't think. It doesn't understand. I don't have to understand it. I don't have to reason with it for it to be. And to begin to concede that that's everyone's nature takes a lot, literally takes the words apart that I use to condemn other people, to give myself the impression that I'm better off because I see them as worse off. And I'm not that way. And I don't do that thing, when in fact, for me to even notice it is my admission that I must do it. And I certainly have the capacity to be so irritated by it. This has been good today. I enjoy it.
Agreed.
Jackie, good to see your name in lights.
Hi. Oh my God. Hello?
Hi, we're here.
Hi. I'm at work actually, but I take people running from rehabs, and one person had to walk back, so I walked the person back, but everybody else was running. But I just wanted to say hi because I have a chance to listen, because usually I don't.
Hey, Jackie, has anybody just kept running?
What?
Has anybody tried to escape? I just keep running,
No,
or they're not.
Not yet. Not yet. Thank God.
Anthony, we all do, to the degree that we defy,
Yeah, right.
we defy
Yeah.
or defend against the thoughts we're having. And
What
the
do you think,
experience we're
Jackie? Do you think is it possible to become more spiritual than you are?
No, it's only possible to let go of more of what you're using to not feel God.
Bingo.
Like the statue of David, how they said that David was under there and they
Yeah.
just got rid of him.
Leonardo said, I always knew it was in there. I just had to chip away to find it.
That's why, we look to get rid of whatever we're using to not feel good, right?
Well, and even when we don't feel good, it's just a condition of the bad thinking we're doing. That's all. It's to start to see it that way. Really, it's not as pronounced as mental obsession seems like something so difficult to get rid of. And the problem is that we keep redefining it as something that we keep maintaining rather than begin to notice it's just something we're doing. It's something we're choosing. And it means the freedom in the moment, if we're free to choose, means I have no obligation to continue ever, ever. And as I do, I must be willing. And it must be my truth that's giving me that impression. It must be my reality. It must be all those self-centered ideas that I'm maintaining that I still haven't come to terms with.
Yeah. And
that's all that it is.
Those are the chunks that we got to etch out.
Yeah, that's the apple that got stuck in Adam's throat that apparently the men claimed Eve ate.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
I mean, if you think of the misogyny and all the hatred at Eve for having eaten the apple, and men end up with an Adam's apple stuck in their throat, it's a pretty good indication that we might have actually blamed the wrong person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And think of the hatred in many cultures. Women are raped and then killed for having dishonored the family. The men aren't held accountable. The women are held accountable. It's backward. It doesn't respect accountability and accountability. It respects an idea that's wrong, that's been held on to for a long time and made believe to be true. And it expresses itself in ways that are destructive always. Like every thought I have that I think is real never has anything productive to offer. The only productivity is destruction. Nature doesn't destroy itself naturally. It actually, if something goes extinct, it's often replaced by something else, unless it's an unnatural occurrence, which is what we've imposed on species that have gone extinct as a result of our doing. Nature wouldn't have come up with that. That's what we think is human nature. It is not natural to be destructive to your own species and or the environment that species thrives on. And yet we've used everything we've ever had that we've called our own has come from this planet and continues to provide us. And we overlook the abundance that's natural and continue to think that scarcity is normal and disease is natural and starvation is just, it occurs because some people aren't as productive as others. When in fact, none of that's true. We have the food, we just don't distribute it equally. We don't distribute it equitably. We don't think equitably. So we're going to make sure that we create divisive appearances to justify the thinking and say, well, I can't do anything about it. That's what everybody else does. How convenient. The one thing I can do, I say I can't do in the name of blaming everyone else. Sick thoughts, sick consequences.
I love that. Sick thoughts, sick consequences.
We're better than we think we are, and we know more than we think. Love you guys.
Thanks, you guys. Love you.
Jack, I have a show I want to recommend to you. So if you want to hang out for a second.
What is it?
Yeah, if you turn off the recording, he means.
Tell the world.
It's a transatlantic. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
The reason I appreciated it, and you will too, is it's right when the Nazis were occupying France.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people. It's based on a true story. There's some famous names.
Do you want
in
to
there.
turn off the recording, Jack?
No.
Okay.
But it touches on a lot of some of the topics we touched on today, because it was showing the artists that were involved, the writers, a lot of the Jewish community that was very creative, and they were trying to get them out of France before it was occupied. They were in Marseille, specifically. But the writer did such an amazing job at connecting the stories and really allowing you to feel the humanity in the human experience, because in that time when the Nazis were trying to occupy, it was just a way of thought. It was just what they thought. That was it. You did this or you died, period. There was no life. You weren't anyone other than what your passport said you were. And a moving part in that show, and it was early on too, it didn't hit me till the show ended, but this gentleman had 4 passports, and they're like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I was this person. I was living here. I got evicted from here. I got kicked out of this country." He's like, they wanted this cut and dry answer of who he was. And his answer was, "I am where I am, who I am." Like if you expect my passport to describe to you who I am as a person, I don't have an answer for you. I can't answer you. And he was getting very flustered they were getting very flustered with each other, but it didn't hit me until the end of it, when I was understanding what his statement was, which is like, I'm just a human being. If you're trying to describe me by my passport and my paperwork, yeah, we're not going to get to the same conclusion. But it was a lot about thought, life, and connecting, and things that we talk about. And on the flip side of the show, they were just showing the lack of all of that, the more of, this is the way we think, and this is what you need to do. And if you don't do these things, you die. Or you will not be a part of our system. So you would appreciate it a lot. It touches on a lot of art and architecture people that lived during that time. And I think Getty, they had like a cameo of one of the Getty family characters in there. So it's good. It's really good. The writer was amazing. She did such a good job. I think her name is Anna Winger.
What's the name of it again?
Transatlantic. They only have like 8 episodes, so it's not something that you're going to watch for the rest of your life. But it was really, really good. I got stuck and I finished the whole thing in 2 days, because it was just really good. Like, I liked the storytelling, and by the end of it, they just did really, they connected the characters so well. The writing was what caught my attention, because it put a lot of humanity in that time.
It's interesting how Ken Burns did a thing on the Vietnam War, and he asked one of the generals of the Viet Cong what it felt to them to win and beat one of the biggest powers on the planet. And the guy said, "That's a question only someone who's never been in war asks, because if you've been in war, you know there are no winners whatsoever." I mean, he missed the chance to take credit for what they had done, because they were pretty formidable in what they did to beat the US and just have them leave. Right? But he had the clarity to see the unity between people was the ultimate guiding force.
Well, and it to that point, there was they did another good job, and we always talk about it, the what ifs, but I could have, or maybe I made this decision. And by the end of it, you got a lot of that, where you could be like, oh, but if he wouldn't have left, or if they would have stayed together, this person. And that's all they kept doing. The Americans specifically, a lot of people are like, oh, you had a passport, you could have left months ago. But the people that were staying was like, that's not what I want. Like, that's not why I'm fighting. That's not the reason that I'm choosing the path that I did. But there was a lot of dialogue that would go back and forth between people, because they're like, why wouldn't you just flee and start a new life and just be over with it? And a lot of people were like, that's not why I live here. I live here. I'm from here. This is my life. I don't want to be moved. So it's very moving. The whole
Yeah.
thing. It's whimsical too. It's funny. It's an easy thing to watch, but it was, again, just, I think you would appreciate it a lot. I think everybody would. It's a good show. It should. I think it was nominated for a few things. I'm not sure.
World War II also fell on the heels of Gertrude Stein and Steinbeck and Hemingway and Marcel Duchamp and all these artists that were really beginning to challenge what art and literature was. F. Scott Fitzgerald, all those guys were over there in the 20s and 30s. Henry Miller evolved out of that and started to really confront things from a very, very progressive conceptual idea. And I'm sure that that was rooted. What was her name? The famous, she was a black jazz singer. I'm missing her name.
Josephine Baker.
Nina, yes, Josephine Baker. And I mean, it was a revolution of ideas in the arts that were promoting a breadth that incorporated people of all colors and types and shapes and sizes within France at that time. So to come in there with a single ideologue, obviously they met with a resistance that was pretty enormous, and it was subtle too. It wasn't just guns and armor. It was just the people's thinking that really undid the Germans in France. They couldn't beat the people from their own perspective.
And they show a lot of that, and that was what I thought was interesting, because it was a wartime show, but I didn't see a lot of war. I saw a lot of thought and understanding of how they were trying to figure out ways to survive and get through it. But yeah, I wanted to mention that to you because I know you appreciate shows like that.
It's beautiful. Appreciate it. And it to our discussion, we may think what we each offer is little, but if we're intimately connected to something that's infinite, the ability to begin to express that has infinite implications on everyone else's ability, is simultaneous, as do the interreactiveness we create when we're constantly demanding other people think like us and act like us and do like us. All that stuff creates it actually fuels the disease and fuels the fear and fuels the presumption that there's nothing else that we can do, versus beginning to act and think in ways that are absolutely not connected to any of that. And I don't suspect, if we are absolutely in a knowing nature, that anyone who witnesses that doesn't begin to witness their own knowing nature in a way that they might not have ever thought existed. And that, to me, is the paradigm shift. That's the change that my suspicion is we're up against in terms of human evolution, in terms of human dynamic, in terms of our capacity as beings to express ourselves as beings rather than simply as we think we are as humans. My sense is the problems we're witnessing, the arguments, the totalitarianism, all of the kind of dictatorships and all of that kind of thinking is just manifesting once again at the global level how contagious the disease is in the face of a greater knowing that isn't contagious at all, because it's an absolute present state of being that everyone is aware of and everybody already knows. We just haven't been talking about it openly, honestly, and publicly to engage at that level and start to actually look at, some of my motives are not very good. And when I'm causing conflicts and making believe they're happening to me, there's a very good chance the conflicts I'm creating are actually impacting everyone else in ways that I don't even imagine are happening. And start to actually witness that. That's ultimately what compassion is about, is actually having passion for what's happening and seeing it with an invigorated sense, and not an intoxication, but an absolute inspired sense of adventure and exploration, because now I'm standing in the face of letting go of everything I thought life depended on, and I'm literally witnessing the elimination of fear and starting to see that all I've ever been afraid of is living, not dying. I've been afraid of just living. Pretty crazy that life is so full, life is so complete, and it's so available, and all I've been doing is trying to make believe I didn't belong and didn't fit and didn't have anything to do with it. Pretty interesting. Love you guys.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for hanging this long. 3 hours. It's a rare length, but I appreciated the dynamic today very much and continue to. So
yeah, good job.
See you around campus.
Good job.
as the world
Love you
turns.
guys.